Good morning, committee members. I'd like to call the meeting to order. I'd ask that everyone in attendance please turn their electronic devices to silent or vibrate, and please ensure that you're properly signed into the system. Are there any disclosures of pecuniary interest this morning? Okay, seeing none. There was a presentation lined up, but that presentation has been removed from the agenda. It will be given at a future meeting. So we'll go right into the items for consideration. First up is CSC C26-2017. That is the Council Expense Policy Review considerations. Committee members may recall we went through the policy and came up with a variety of items to consider changes. Those items are all here, I think, and if I may, prepared very well by the clerk's office, so I thank them for that in terms of helping to guide the discussion this morning. There are several suggestions from the last committee round for us to try to get through today. But first, I would ask for a mover and a seconder to get it on the floor. Moved by Councillor Burrows, thank you. Seconded by Councillor Volpatti. There's also a memo, I believe, in front of you from the clerks giving some guidance in terms of how to deal with the plethora of items before us in an appropriate manner to try to guide the discussion this morning. So it's been moved and seconded. I'm happy to go through one by one in terms of consensus. Some of them are just housekeeping, some of them are information, and some of them may need to be determined through an amendment. Councillor Quirk.
Chair, I would move that the housekeeping items be accepted as presented. Yeah, housekeeping items 1, 4, 5, 6, 9, 12, 13, 14, and 19.
Well, wow, Tony.
That's fine. Okay, so thank you, Councillor. I'll take that as an amendment. The ones highlighted as housekeeping, that they be approved. Seconded by Councillor Height. Oh, sorry. Okay. Seconded by Councillor Augustine. Thank you. We all will also have an opportunity to do that, Councillor.
Point of order.
What's your point of order?
That Councillor Height is interrupting the process and just speaking out of turn. We have a speakers list if he wants to speak to it.
So thank you. If I may, there's an amendment moved and seconded, and in fairness to Councillor Height, I did ask him. So yes, an amend list. There's an amendment list, Councillor. You're on the main motion. All right. So, Councillor Augustine on the amendment by Councillor Quirk.
Councillor Quirk moved it all, so if he goes first, I'll go second.
Thank you, Chair. Just speaking to the amendment, I agree that we should go through these item by item, as Councillor Height has suggested. My intention of passing the housekeeping amendments were so that those would be all done in block, unless someone wanted specifically to speak to the individual housekeeping amendments. They're on the table now by virtue of my amendment. So I am equally happy to go through them all one by one, but I appreciate the work the clerks did to pull out the red line housekeeping amendments so that we could at least get those rectified if debate takes longer on the other items. That's all.
Thank you. Councillor Augustine.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. I agree with the first few here. Just wondering about number 6. It says here, so is save and accept parking fines, is that in or not in? Not in, says Anne-Marie. Okay.
Yeah, it's accept parking fines, so that rules that out.
Okay, so if we park somewhere, but if we, whatever, we miss it by a couple minutes, we get a ticket, the region doesn't reimburse us, we pay it, right? Okay, perfect. And then can we just hear a little bit about, I think 13's included. Can we hear a little bit more about that again in relation to the report that we have on the agenda later on in this meeting, Mr. Chair, about this nomination meeting, because that has changed. I guess that's seen as housekeeping, I think, under Councillor Quirk in my motion, but I just wanted to have some discussion about the election year restrictions.
Okay.
Is that just simply clarifying what that means?
get a response for you.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to the councillor, the section 4.10A of the draft policy provides that no member shall use the facilities, equipment, supplies, services, staff, or other resources of the region for any election campaign or campaign-related activities. And so it's clarified during the election period being the time when the nomination period begins and ends on the last day of the term of office. Under the new amendments to the Municipal Elections Act, municipalities are now required to pass a policy bylaw to govern the use of municipal resources during election year. So that'll be a further report coming forward that will encapsulate all of the provisions of that. So this is just a quick reference really in the expense policy, but the heart of the matter will be in a separate policy.
That's great. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair.
Great, thank you. Councillor Height.
Sure, thank you. If you go to 4.7, mobile devices in accordance with, members shall arrange an appropriate out-of-country mobile device plan in order to avoid excessive roaming charges. It doesn't state that the councillor should be paying for it, because if they're going out of country on holidays, we shouldn't be paying for their cell use anyway. And I'd expect it to state something like only paid by the region if it's on regional business, and if not, at their expense. Can I hear from staff, how would it apply to staff? That policy regarding their
Go ahead,
cell
Ms.
phone.
Scott, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to the councillor. The clarification there is in the event a member of council is out of country or even out of province, depending on what telephone plan that you do have, that they take the necessary steps to purchase a out-of-country plan, which is typically $10 a day. I've done it many times myself, so it avoids the roaming charges. And in the event a member of council, while on vacation or out of country, has to engage in regional business, then that option is there. And I think it's at the discretion of the member of council that they're going to be trusted to use the cell phone according to the rules that have been associated with the use of the phone.
So a follow-up, so it's not for their personal use, it's not for their business use, that some councillors use the cell phone for their business as well as regional business. It's only for regional business.
That's correct.
If that's clearly understood, that's great, but I don't think that's always a fact, and it's going to be hard to determine. I have two cell phones. One's regional, one's mine. So I can determine what I need to do at different times. If I go south, this is only used in a Wi-Fi area, my regional one, where I buy a package for mine.
Right.
Because it's personal use. And my concern is, and I know it was accidental in a number of cases where councillors took their iPads or their phones south and had huge roaming bills, and that was a concern of mine that I was looking into and brought forward. And I don't know if this is truly addressing that concern, if it's regional business or not regional business.
Mr. Chair.
So I'm not sure if that clarifies it. I think some of the wording suggests that we have to determine whether it's regional business or not. So hopefully if we're going on holidays, we leave our regional devices home, because we're not going to probably do much regional business when we're in the islands. I hope that's the case. If we go over to 4.10,
Sorry, Councillor, just before you leave that last point.
Yep.
Ms. Scott.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just going to suggest if the councillor prefers greater clarity, we can add to that provision that only while engaged in regional business.
if I would love to add that, if that tightens this up a little bit. Thank you.
Fine, okay, thank you.
4.10, I have a major concern with what's written here in red. and it's 4.10A. The 31 of us that sit around this horseshoe, this now tells us we can use our regional devices to help us get reelected, except during the election period. Our devices shouldn't be used at all, as far as I'm concerned, for anything related to election or reelection. If someone wants to run at the region as chair or a counselor, they don't have the advantage of using regional equipment to help them get elected. And by adding that red, now that states that, okay, I can start using my device, my cell phone or my laptop today, to start working on some things that might be related, but I don't, as soon as May the 1st or whatever the new date is, I can't use anything. Well, we shouldn't be using it today, as far as I'm concerned.
Point of order, Chair?
So if
Yeah,
I
so
can
it's
get
not a housekeeping item?
No, my point of order is I wasn't sure which one, which item.
4.10A.
So in the list of 1 to 20, in Appendix 1, it would be number 11, which is an information item.
Oh, sorry. Point of order. When I referred to the numbers that I was referring,
sorry.
I was looking at the clerk's memos of those
I'm
numbers.
looking at, I'm
Yeah.
sorry, I was looking at the
Sorry, my
appendix.
apologies.
That's fine. So,
It's okay.
thanks, Counselor. We, right now, it's the housekeeping matters that are part of this amendment. And while I appreciate and respect your commentary, it is about an information item, which I'm sure
It's
we
number
will also be
13.
discussed.
13 is what I'm speaking to. By adding what's in red,
13.
my concern is it's suggesting we can use our devices currently to get organized, our cell phones, et cetera, but as effective May the 1st or whatever that new date is, at that point, we're not allowed to use it. Well, my concern is we shouldn't be using any regional equipment for anything dealing with reelection or campaigning. That's where my concern is by adding that red portion. If everyone wants to read it and either agree or disagree.
He's talking about 4.1.
So therefore, I have two cell phones. Mine can be used for reelection purposes. This one shouldn't be. This device shouldn't be used at all for anything dealing with election. Whether I call someone today saying I'm thinking about reelecting or not, these devices are regional devices, and anyone wanting to run against us would be at disadvantage because they don't have a device paid by the public for us to use. And they're out of pocket, we aren't. That's where I have a problem with what's written in red.
CAO?
Point of order, Chair?
I'm just going to allow the CEO to respond, and then it might help your point of order.
Through you, Chair, to Councillor Height. I understand the intent of your comments. My concern is who's policing these matters. It's going to be very difficult for staff to distinguish when a councillor is using their regional device for their personal business, whether they're doing some shopping, whether they're doing some electioneering. It's difficult for us to monitor that or enforce it or police it in any way. So I understand the intent. I'm just not sure how practical the application will be.
Well, through you to staff, I'm in full agreement that it's going to be very difficult, if not impossible. But even adding what's in red doesn't make any sense because the statement that no member shall use the facilities is clear. It doesn't matter when the date is, when the election is going to be called, whatever the parameters are, we shouldn't be using it now or ever. And that's why my concern by putting the red in, you're now saying here's a specific period of time that it's not allowed. Well, it shouldn't be allowed at all. That's
Okay,
my
so-
concern.
So thank you. Councillor Quirk, you had a point of order.
Sorry, my point of order is that the Municipal Elections Act tells us what we can and can't do before we're nominated. So no one should be doing any electioneering before they're nominated regardless, because that's actually what the Election Act says. So the point of this red line is that the date of the electioneering for when you can get nominated has changed. It used to be you could say the election year because it was January 1st, so anyone could get nominated as of January 1st. Now it's May 1st. So the clarification here is clearly that you cannot use these devices once you are duly nominated as per the Municipal Elections Act. I think Councillor Height is trying to impose a level of scrutiny on this policy that is already covered by the Municipal Elections Act.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. It's not really a point of order, but you made your point.
Well, I'd like to have that voted on separately because I don't believe it should even be there. I don't think we should be using our devices at all for anything related to any thoughts about getting reelected. So if we can vote on that separately, if we can. And I'll ask the question on 4.11 housekeeping. And again, I'm looking at, I'll go on to the other sheet that we all are looking at. The 7 years where they're talking about rolling over for 7 years plus one, the information online. Through you to staff, is it 19? Is it a problem having it at 3 years, 4 years, 7 years? It's all about the same. As soon as it's online, it doesn't matter. It would just roll. So my thoughts are 7 years is, you really want to make sure that everything about our expenses are online, going back 7 years after we put the first group on. I don't think it's important, but.
General Manager?
Yes, Mr. Chair, through members of committee, staff does not foresee this being a concern. Our retention policy only goes back 7 years, hence why we've allocated 7 years moving forward.
Okay, I don't have a problem with that. Okay, thank you. So my concern is that one, I don't think we should be using any of our devices, and I'd like that red line, I'd vote against having that added. And we all understand what the municipal act allows and doesn't allow, or will know when we're told with the new election.
So thank you, Councillor. We can vote on that particular item separately as per your request. Councillor Petrowski.
Thank you, Chair. I think that is a moot point, whether it's in there or whether it's out of there. Somebody could call you and talk to you about the election, and you have no idea that that's why they called you, and it's out of the nomination period. So I could just see the councillor saying, hang on a second, let me hang up and call me on my other phone, and then we can have a conversation. It's moot. It looks good in the paper, so I'm glad that we're going to vote on it. The easiest way to solve it is get rid of region-supplied hardware. Everyone go on their own hardware and get the stipend, and then you could argue whether the stipend or not is covering electioneering or not. I don't think the stipend is particularly that high, especially with the cost of cell rates here in Ontario or in Canada, Chair. But I'm sure that looks good in the paper if we get rid of that, and I'm sure we're all going to be much more careful from that. Chair, my concern is on item 4.9. I just want to thank Councillor Maves for fighting for this. There's the redlining of an attached appendix to cover members from legal proceedings. I think the code of conduct is a form of a legal proceeding, Chair. The notion that a councillor would have to spend his time and her time or her money to fight a potential salacious code of conduct complaint or a false complaint, and then have to endure when that false complaint even makes it out and accuses that person of such and such, and that getting into the paper, the damage is already done. It takes hours and hours, I went through it last term, to put your defense together to prove to the Integrity Commissioner that the code of conduct had no merit. And that's not fair to a councillor to have to spend their own time. Nobody in the region, when we're comparing the staff, whether it's police or other agencies, nobody in the region has to endure that kind of cost hit. So the fact that this isn't here, the fact that our code of conduct is wrong anyway, the fact that the code of conduct doesn't apply to MPPs, but it applies to us, there are so many problems with this whole process.
Point of order, Chair.
Go ahead, Councillor.
Section 4.8 isn't up for consideration.
No, it's section,
No, it's not in the amendment.
You spoke to 4.9.
Where 4.9C is included in the red line and the housekeeping motions, which includes the indemnification policy.
I thought
I think
I see
you're looking
item
at
6.
discussion. You're looking at item discussion 7 and 8.
I'm looking at 6, sorry,
Okay,
not 6.
6 was parking expenses, Councillor.
Through the chair, please.
4.
So, just to be clear, let's all use Appendix 1, and please state which item number so we can all follow along appropriately. It'd be very helpful.
Mr. Chair. Discussed up on the screen so everyone's clear of what's being discussed, because we're jumping around all over the place.
The clerks will do their best to try to attempt that. In the meantime, please,
So it's in Appendix 1, 4.9, right? Legal costs?
yeah, in Appendix 1, there's item 1 to 20. Please reference which particular item you're relating it to. In this case, we have an amendment on the floor to deal with.
Oh, because
housekeeping items
number
only.
7 is not circled in red, it's not eligible.
For discussion right now.
Okay. Well, unfortunately, I can't stick around to enjoy the show later. I got my comments out. It is cruel and evil to ask councillors to have to pay in time and money to defend themselves against code of conduct complaints. It's as evil as the code of conduct itself. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Volpatti?
Yes, mine is number 14.
Thank you.
And I just want it clarified, because 14 and 15 look to be on the same issue. What I would like to have, and I'm not sure this accomplishes it, is that change 15 days to 30 days after the expenses are incurred, but I want it on a quarterly basis. So I'm kind of combining 14 and 15, I think.
If I may, my understanding is that it's going to be reported quarterly, but councillors have, originally, they had 15 days to submit after the deadline. This suggests 30 days
After.
or even 45 days after.
All right, so it's 30 days after the quarterly incurment of expenses, right?
Correct.
They are two different amendments, Chair.
Well, I understand it's recommending change 15 days to 30 days. General Manager?
Well, I want it clarified, because I don't think it's clear the way it's here now.
Yes,
Okay, sorry.
Go ahead, Mr.
Yes,
Carter.
Mr. Chair, through the committee members, the recommendation would be 30 days at the month's end. So once you receive your monthly invoice or statement, you have 30 days to submit it. We will then report this quarterly. So we're giving you the 30 days on top of the date when you receive your monthly statement.
Okay, I understand it now. I will vote against this. I want only to be responsible to report my expenses quarterly and to have 30 days after that to do it.
Thank you, Councillor. You can make that adjustment now. I think that's what we're talking, rather than vote against it. If you want to make that.
All right, yes, I'm making it
suggestion.
now, please.
So firstly,
Have I made it clear?
to the mover and seconder, is that friendly or?
Well, Chair, I would suggest that what Councillor Volpatti is looking to do is change item 15, which wasn't on consideration for Councillor Augustine and my amendment. Item 15 is up for discussion afterwards. So regardless of if we pass this amendment, the housekeeping ones, changing the deadline would be something that would be up for consideration when we talk about item 15.
Sorry, I disagree, because 14 says after the previous month's end. We're talking about a month. I want to change it to quarterly. I want to do it now, please, because that's the only way to make it clear. I don't want to wait till 15.
Yeah, you make a lot of sense, Councillor. I think that's
Thank you very
appropriate.
much for that, Chair. I'm glad we agree.
So it would be easiest if the mover and seconder took it as a friendly amendment.
Yes,
Otherwise,
I don't know who they
let's
are.
make a change.
So, Councillor Augustine?
Councillor Quirk and Councillor
Sorry,
Augustine.
through you, Chair, Councillor Augustine?
Who are the mover and seconder, Chair?
Councillor Augustine and
Councillor
myself.
Quirk and Councillor Augustine.
Councillor Volpatti is asking to amend our amendment to include item 15 as a housekeeping one. It's actually not. It's to change it from month end to quarterly for our responsibility to submit expenses. We can do it at this point and make it included as item 15 to pass as our amendment.
What's your preference?
I have to sit beside her, but my preference would be to.
That's why I asked.
My concern is, by doing it as a friendly amendment now, it opens up the floor to including all the other items for friendly amendments to this particular motion, and then we're debating the other items that were not supposed to be contentious.
So, Councillor, if I
Well,
may,
that's a bunch of
if I
baloney.
may, it's a yes or no, friendly amendment or not.
Mr.
I don't
Chair,
wanna start debating it.
I'd prefer to discuss it. There might be another amendment, and we could discuss it then. Let's get the housekeeping ones dealt with as And I'll take the heat, Councillor Quirk.
My point is that we can pass 14 now and also do 15 separately because they are two items. One talks to how long after the deadline, and one talks about when the deadline is.
Okay, so I'd like the amendment put on the floor, please.
Here's what I'm gonna do, if I may. Councillor Height had asked, I believe, for number 13 to be voted on separately. Councillor Patty, I will take number 14 to be voted on separately, and it's at that time where we can consider those outside of the other housekeeping items. That's appropriate.
Is that fair? All right, if you say so, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Burrows.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I just have two items. Number one, shall make every attempt to use the most economical and efficient mode of transportation.
What section?
That's section 4.3.A.
What's the number of the section?
One.
One.
I said that. And just through you, when you're ready. Hello.
Sorry, Councillor.
I'd like to get a comment from the CAO about, I heard the talk about using the phones and it's almost impossible. This make every attempt, does that mean that staff will even have a slight look at the expenses going to BC or going to wherever we go on FCM? I like the concept, but I don't know how it can be checked.
So I recall this was up for conversation the last time we talked about it. So, Mr. Carter?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through to members of committee. Actually, I think this dialogue began with the councillor from Lincoln brought it up. So we incorporated this in the policy, and we were trying to determine what is the best attempt. So, for example, you might go online and book a flight for $500, and the next day you think that's the most practical, but the next day it might go up to 700 or reverse might be cheaper. So we try to say the best attempt of when you think you're going to go or how you're going to arrive at that time. Rates go up and down for flights, whether that's through train, airplane mode, whatever it is. So we just use the best attempt. We expect councilors will look at it and make the most appropriate decision based on that time of their travel. So that's why we use best attempt, because we don't want to confine people into that existing rate potentially.
Mr. Chair, I totally agree with trying to make, all of us trying to do that. But when transportation, airline alone, can range to a particular city that this council went to from $500 a trip to $1,200 a trip, that's not a daily change. That's something quite substantial, and it was for a variety of reasons. I don't even know what the reasons were. But I'm not talking about that, best before date. I get that, but not when it's more than double what everybody else was paying. And how are you going to police it?
CAO?
Through your chair to Councilor Burrows. So how is staff going to police it? We're not. It's councillor discretion on following the policy.
That's fine.
However, if we see something, we will then recommend maybe next time what we're seeing other councillors do.
That's excellent.
The second, we actually have secured a travel agent who will do all that for you now. You just simply contact the travel agent, tell them where you want to go, and the travel agent will find you the best price, the best mode of transportation based on your needs, your times, if you're traveling in a group or whatever. So we've established that I'll refer to the acting commissioner on the process of contacting the travel agent.
Thank you. Through the chair. Yeah, so it's a pilot project. We'll roll it out. You'll have a contact within clerk's office.
Yeah.
And it's a simple phone call. They'll give you essentially 3 options to travel. You also get their best pricing because they secure, because of the volume that they undertake, they secure different benefits at different hotels and that, so you'll get those benefits. You can also get individual analysis for each traveler on their travel expenses provided. It's all provided by the agent.
So I guess, thank you for all of that. My only question is, so the region will no longer book hotels? It'll all be booked through the travel agent?
Through the chair, that's what we're attempting to move towards. They'll, and then if there's any changes, you will deal directly with the agent. You'll have a 1-800 number that if there's issues or changes, you can undertake that with the travel agent themselves.
Thank you. And my only other question is number 5, turn off roaming on a temporary basis. I guess what you're planning to do does not deal with those of us that live on the border, either in Niagara on the Lake, Niagara Falls, or Fort Erie. We get roaming charges regularly, and that's why we need roaming turned off. And when we need roaming, we can get it. So I'm not sure that we're really dealing with our local problem on the borders.
CO?
I recall an example where Dr. Monkley lived on the border, and he would always incur international roaming charges. What we would have to do is that we would contact the phone carrier and say these are not appropriate charges. We'd have to reconcile almost every month to get out of the additional costs.
So therefore, Mr. Chair, turn off the roaming unless one of the councillors needs it. Then we don't have that problem. I get it. I'm sure the mayor gets it. And I know in Fort Erie they get it regularly because the more powerful tower is on the US side. If you cut off roaming, it goes to a secondary tower on our side. And so it just makes such logical sense. Cut it off. Any councillor that needs roaming, get it for them. But though, as a general rule, it should be cut off.
I'll provide a little bit of flexibility on that particular item.
To
Go ahead.
say that if I turn off roaming, I can't make a call because I'm so close to the river that it doesn't bounce back to our tower. I can't make a call,
Okay, thank
and
you.
I can't accept it.
On a point of order, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Councillor.
Can we just pick one item and deal with it with everyone speaking on the item and then move to the next one?
That's not a point of order. Thank you. You're on the speaker's list soon.
Okay,
Councillor
well, I'll
Burrows,
speak
you have the
about 3
floor.
points.
Councillor Burrows, you have the floor. Are you?
Well, I'd like a response to that.
Well, you stated your preference. I mean, the motion on the floor right now for number 5 is outlined clearly. Members shall arrange an appropriate out-of-country mobile device plan. If you're asking that voted on separately, we can do that as well.
Well, somebody else this morning used the term outrageous before they left. So I'm also concerned. I'd like that voted on separately, and I'll probably call for a recorded vote. How stupid is that? But simply, it makes no sense for those of us that live on the border not to keep getting this issue of, oh, you're roaming. Well, no, I'm not. I haven't been across the border. So anyway, when the time comes, we'll vote on it separately.
Okay, go ahead. Mr. Burgess?
Just through the chair, when this was previously discussed, I had the opportunity to speak with our director of IT. And the director of IT had made comments to me, and I will reconfirm that today, but that inadvertent roaming charges are no longer an issue with Rogers billing. It used to be an issue before, but I believe there's better technology to understand where the phone actually is at any given point in time. And now the only charges that they're getting is when the phone is actually in a foreign jurisdiction. You don't get the inadvertent pings off of the tower. So I don't believe the issue.
I get messages that says it is.
You'll get the message, but you won't actually get the charge. They won't incur the charge because they actually identify where the phone is. But I'll reconfirm that with our IT director. But he had said that that's no longer a significant issue for us.
That's great. And I guess I can go to IT and just have them turn off my roaming, can they?
I could do it right now.
Yeah, so the individual councillor can do it. You can do it on your own. or you can bring it
I'm
back.
having it done by our consultant.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Timms.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just remaining on item 5 on the roaming, the recommendation is pretty clear about out-of-country mobile device. But we just need to be clear, there's domestic roaming and international roaming. And we're discussing here is international roaming. Is there a distinction between, like your recommendation is pretty clear out of country, but if we're in Calgary or Saskatchewan, that'll be a roaming, be a domestic roaming.
Mr. Carter?
Mr. Chair, through the members of council, so there are plans Canada-wide. However, as we just said, and we've said in the past, is that there is an opportunity for councillors to manage their own systems and softwares through support through IT. So if you know you're going to Calgary, or if you're going out of province, there's either plans that we can install so that the roaming charges are not activated, or you can come deal with IT, and IT can set up your plan accordingly so that you don't receive roaming charges. So within Canada, there's many options, and I would encourage that every member of council come to IT or myself or the clerk's department, and we can assist with the plan that you're looking for to assist with the roaming.
So the motion that we have in front of us deals only with international roaming, and I'm satisfied with that. My other question, Mr. Chairman, went back to item 13, the year of election restrictions. I support the recommendation that's in front of us, but I would like to add a little clarification from past experience, where it says no member shall use facilities, equipment, resources of the Niagara region. And what I'd like to add in there, facilities of the Niagara region not commonly available to the public. And I raise the question because it's been raised before, you know, the mayor or an incumbent stands in front of City Hall and has a picture. And that's covered, you know, does that policy say I can't stand in front of a regional facility for a campaign picture? Yet every candidate that is not an elected person can stand in front of the region's water treatment plant and say whatever they want to say. And is that considered using a regional facility? So my amendment says that, you know, anybody can stand in front of any municipal building and get their picture taken. And I don't want to say that an incumbent cannot do that, but a candidate can. So the wording I'm offering is right after Niagara region, insert not commonly available to the public. You know, so my computer is not commonly available to the public, and the printing in here is not commonly available. So if the clerk would like to add that, then I think it clarifies the whole question of a picture on the steps of City Hall.
Thank you, Councillor. That one's going to be voted on separately, so I see the clerk
Are we speaking on that one at this point? That was the amendment I thought we were speaking on.
Councillor, right, so if I may, that one has been requested to be voted on separately.
Okay.
So when it is voted on separately, please bring that forward. I understand the clerks have captured it. We'll raise that issue when it's voted on separately.
Please make sure I'm paying attention, Mr. Chairman, when that one comes
I will
forward.
look to you. I will look to you.
Put my cell phone on audible. Yes, okay. Thank you.
Councillor D'Angelo?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just speaking on item 13, the election year restrictions. My question is, and this has happened in the past, a regional councillor has run for an elected position and he put his regional email address on his election brochure, actually on the website, and then also a cell phone number. Now, what is the penalty for that? Do you automatically lose your cell phone and rights to that? Because it sounds like common sense, but it happens and people will do it. They'll push the boundaries during election. And what will staff do with something like that?
Ms. Kett?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. There are penalties under the Municipal Elections Act for violations under that act directly, but I'm not aware of anything that addresses this specifically. My experience in the past, when a candidate has violated the use of municipal resources and facilities during election year, is we draw it to their attention, and we've always received cooperation. So if it's an incumbent and they have filed their nomination papers to run in the election, they set up a campaign website and they use their regional contact information. That is probably, if it's on their own website, I'd have to give some time to think whether or not that is appropriate, because the new provisions in the Municipal Elections Act allow the municipal website, so when we post the candidates that register, to link their, or link from the municipal website to their campaign website for their information. So it's probably not appropriate to use your regional contact information. You should use your personal information, and it's always best to keep those two worlds entirely separate so that you don't raise any concerns.
Just something, yeah, you're correct. It is reasonable to do that. My problem is it won't be done by some people at times. And what it will, can we impose a penalty in here that they'll lose their usage during the election period of their municipal regional facility devices, because they should know that. They should know better, but they don't. So that's my concern. What is the penalty on the election? Is there a penalty through the elections, Municipal Elections Act?
Through you, Mr. Chair, it has to do with corruption and bribery and those sorts of things.
Well, Mr. Chair, I'm looking to you then. Should I put it at the appropriate time when we're voting on this, an amendment that you'll lose your regional devices if you do that? Like, there's a difference between receiving a phone call about an election, as Councillor, who's not here anymore, mentioned. You could say, okay, well, you're talking to me about the election, you'll have to call me back, because you didn't know that was a call. But to specifically put your phone number there, it's a huge advantage to an incumbent, especially to put a regional email address or a cell phone that belongs to the region and then use that for election purposes. I don't think it's appropriate, and I'm wondering, and it happens, so I'm wondering how we can stop it, as opposed to saying, well, it's unreasonable to do that.
Ms. Kett?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was just going to suggest and remind Council again that under the new Municipal Elections Act, Council has to pass a bylaw to establish a policy to govern the use of municipal resources during election year. That policy has to be in place by May 1st, prior to commencement of the nomination period. So you may want to defer the fulsomeness of this discussion until that report comes forward, which will contain all of the provisions that relate to that particular matter. The area clerks have been working on a common use of municipal resource policy so that each of the municipalities have a similar policy in place, and consistent application can occur. And from the ones that I've seen, that I've studied in the past, they're all pretty much similar. And so the council may wish to wait to have a more fulsome discussion on this topic when that report comes forward.
Councillor, the other possible opportunity is Integrity Commission complaint to validate whether the policy was breached, and if it was, it would come to council for options.
Yeah, again, that sounds good, but in an election time frame where it's a very minute timeline in there, someone could do something, doesn't affect them, they get themselves elected, and life goes on. And they'll get slapped on the wrist saying, oh, you shouldn't have done that, you should know better, and oh well, right? That's what happens out there, and I think we need to address that. So I'd be more willing to defer this to a further wholesome discussion for the May 1st deadline to deal with this, so that we have an appropriate policy in place to deal with that specific, just item number 13, which deals with the election items. So I'll leave it till I guess it comes up for vote. And, or Mr. Chair, can I be the first to speak on that, to defer it?
I was going to allow Councillor Height to do that because he asked for it to be voted on separately.
Okay, I'll leave it up to Councillor Height then. Next one is item number 14. I know there was a discussion of changing the dates. Again, if I could get maybe some rationale here, if someone does not submit their expenses within 30 days, after a quarter, after a month, whatever it is, again, what is the penalty for not doing that?
Mr. Carter? Mr. Chair, through the members of council, it's the discretion of the councillor. There's a policy requesting that you submit those documentation so we can upload it and provide it publicly. If the councillor does not choose to provide us that documentation, again, this is a policy at councillors or individual councillors' discretion.
Okay, can we impose a penalty besides that to say that your expenses won't be reimbursed? Is that within our jurisdiction?
Mr. Chair, through members of council, you can obviously add an amendment, obviously, but knowing what the topic or that amendment would be in terms of penalty, we might have to go back and investigate that further. So I can't, not knowing what the penalty would be or what council's direction is with respect to that topic or that comment right now, I can't answer yes or no if you can.
Okay, well, it seems odd because you will put these policies in place and then they won't be followed, and it's disappointing. But I guess my question then is the rationale of having this done monthly or on a regular basis. Maybe if staff could elaborate the benefit of that for.
Sorry, Mr. Chair, can you just clarify that? So the benefit of monthly and quarterly?
Yeah.
Sorry.
I'll give you an example. I was doing my expenses every 6 months because they're very nominal, right? It takes me a lot of time to put stuff together looking at my mileage. So I would do it every 6 months. Well, potentially it could be every month, so it adds time to me to do that, which is fine. But my question is, okay, so I submit a receipt for $10 instead of submitting a receipt for $120 at the end of 6 months. What is the benefit of doing it on a monthly basis for the corporation?
Mr. Chair, through the members of committee, it's strictly administrative. If we have 31 councillors coming in with 6 months, say, of information, and we're trying to upload that information at one time, it's very difficult. And we usually have at a month period, it's easier for us to gather that information and be prepared for that quarterly update or that monthly update that we're going to be preparing. It's really just an administrative function that assists staff on a day-to-day basis.
Okay, thanks for the answer. And just to be clear, number 19 is post information for 7 years plus current. That's a red item too, right, that we're discussing? Okay. In relation to that, will all expenses be posted or just ones that come through a mileage, come through expense reports? Because there's occasions at times where councillors, they'll go to an event and the region will buy a table, and then those councillors go to that event. It gets distributed amongst the councillors. Will that be posted as part of their expenses too?
Go ahead. Mr. Chair, through the members of council, all expenses incurred from council will be posted.
Okay, so even the chair's expenses that go through his account, not necessarily mileage, they'll be posted also?
Mr. Chair, through the members of council, committee, sorry, this policy is for all members of council and the chair.
Okay, thank you. That's my clarity for my questions. I have further ones, but they relate to other ones that we're going to be debating. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Edgar.
Thank you, Chair. My questions have been answered.
Thank you. Councillor Diodati.
Thank you, Chair. The only one I wanted to weigh in on was the one Councillor Burrows was speaking of regarding the roaming. And I know firsthand in my office, I'll go from one end to the other and it says, welcome to Canada, you know, or welcome to AT&T. So, but I agree with what Councillor Valpatti, because I've tried this in the past because it's a common thing on border towns. I shut the roaming off, which you can do with your phone. You don't have to call anyone to do it. And then you can't get a call out. And there's dead zones, you cannot make a call. So I would be more inclined to go to our carrier and ask them what they're gonna do, because they know within a couple of feet how far their range is. I've sat with these people and they know all the carriers, they know exactly the range, they know their dead zones, and they know the areas where they're weak, especially along the border. So that's an issue with the carrier, not us. And with technology today, there's no reason we should even get billed for that. They know where these calls are coming from, but it's easier to bill us and then we have to try to get it back, right? That's just an economic model for them to win. And as a big customer of theirs, I think it's incumbent on them to fix their problem, not our problem. So it should be the reverse. You don't charge us unless you can prove we've been there, rather than the other way. It adds time to staff, inconvenience for us, and at the end of the day, it's just about a communication tool. It's ineffective if we have to deal with these types of problems. So I would just suggest in that regard, that's an issue staff deal with, because oftentimes we need that phone to work wherever we are at any time. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Councillor Gale.
Thank you, Chair. I'm not spending a lot of time on this, and I'm enjoying the conversation within reason. But I have one question based on what Councillor DeAngelo said, and I just want to make sure that down the way we have an appeal. If something's not covered in here to the chair, if the chair doesn't agree with it, or we don't agree with the chair's verdict on it, then we come back to council, because we can't incorporate everything here, but we're going to cover every little nitpick thing. Something's going to come up in a month from now, and I don't want to go through this again. Can I be comfortable that we have an appeal of something, if something is not covered here, to go to the chair?
So first of all, I want to be clear, there is a policy in place today. This is just looking at revisions to the policy that's already approved. So I wanted to highlight that. With respect to any appeal mechanism, I guess I look to Mr. Carter.
Yes, Mr. Chair, through the members of committee, yes, under section 5.3, there is an appeal process with respect to this policy. So
that's all I care. I don't have to get into
committee.
fine detail. Thank you. We're good.
Councillor Quirk for a second time on your motion.
Thank you, Chair. And I just wanted to be clear, we are going to vote on the individual items. We captured those items specifically. It's more just a process question as opposed to speaking to any of them. Are we allowing anyone to now speak to anyone, or when those come up, people can make an amendment to the amendment?
So,
because we're making an amendment now and voting on the amendment by these items. So I'm just asking process. If anyone wants to make it, it'll be a second amendment that we'd be able to talk to at that point, unless we consider it friendly.
well, I don't want to get ahead of ourselves just yet, but right now, if you look at number 2 of the memo, that's in essence what's on the floor right now, items 1, 4, 5, 6, 9, 12, 13, 14, and 19.
But some of those numbers have been asked to vote on separately, so I'm
Yes.
just trying to...
That's right. So right now, if you have no other comments, we will vote on all of them except 5, 13, and 14.
And I'm
then
just
then
asking,
we'll
when
bring
those
5
come up,
forward.
people can make amendments at that time, and then we can discuss the pros and cons of those, because I've heard a couple go back and forth. I don't want to speak to the...
I will hear and consider all comments related to those as they come forward.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. So seeing no other questions, again, to be clear, maybe we put them on the screen. So Councillor Maves. Sorry, and Councillor Easton, I see you there as well. Okay, Councillor Maves. We are on the housekeeping items listed on the memorandum, number 2.
I want to talk about 4.9, Chair.
That's not on yet. Councillor, in Appendix 1, there's a list of numbers 1 to 20. If you can highlight.
I want to speak to 4.9. Pardon me?
So you'll have an opportunity after this.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Easton.
Mr. Chairman, I don't believe this is, oh, yes. I don't believe this is a point of order, Mr. Chairman, but I want to just make a clarification about the policy, the principle behind the policy. The policy now is a policy for council, not council and staff. Am I correct?
Correct.
Okay. And in the policy, it implies that councillors will take personal responsibility for their expenses. And this policy reflects a best practice that is the smoothest, that will lend itself to the smoothest operation of the corporation. And if we choose not to cooperate with that, there isn't a hammer coming down on us, but an acknowledgement that we're not probably contributing to a smooth process. Because nobody's going to come and start looking over our shoulder. At the end of the day, if there are questions asked, or if we miss an opportunity to have our expenses posted, that's our responsibility. This is not kindergarten. Okay, so that being said, are there really any amendments that are required? That would be my question.
So again, first and foremost, there's a policy that's already approved. We're following the process as outlined by council. When they approved the policy, they did want to be able to consider revisions. And so it's been sent to committee. Committee's come up with about 20 so far that we have in front of us for those considerations. Whether there's amendments necessary or not, that's the will of committee.
Okay, all right, well, I guess I was trying to assist Councillor Gale's process as well, that we spend a little more time on this individually and not so much at the committee level. Thank you very much for your accommodation.
Thank you, and I do agree and appreciate what, your comments. So with that, I'll call the question. Okay, great, thank you. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried, thank you. So number 5 has been asked to be discussed and voted on separately, so there were comments made. I think it was just asked to be voted on separately. I don't recall that there was any potential revision to that one. Councillor Burrows.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and subject to following Mayor Diodati's suggestion, I don't need it voted on separately, but I'd like a response that we will follow up on what he suggested.
Through the chair, I'm going to defer to someone who is a lot more intelligent than I am on this issue. So we have brought Director Stuart Henry in to explain that this issue is less of an issue for us nowadays, but.
Mr. Stewart?
Yeah, so on the roaming charges, I think there's some potential misconceptions and some things that we'll also validate with Rogers as well, which is our primary incumbent provider, at least for the councillors here. But we call it accidental roaming charges, or what they are when they cross the border. It's a sort of a known term, and more often than not, those are waived automatically. So to Councillor Diodati's point, those are already captured, and they know, to your point, they know where they are, and they know that you've jumped towers on it. Where we're having problems with reception, I think the comment that was made earlier is bang on, that the provider that phone may be with just might not have coverage in that area. So it's less about forcing you to roam and more about sort of saying, hey, I just don't have coverage in this area, so I'm choosing to use alternate coverage. One of the things that might want to consider on that for people who are in those places that have poor coverage for the current provider is we could look at other providers for those people as well. So there are other people that have been on Rogers that we've moved to TELUS with staff as well, where they just haven't been able to get reception. Does that answer some of the questions?
Not really.
Could I just say, Councillor Height and I are going to be at the Brock Hotel for 4 days.
Not together. Just to be clear.
Oh, I mean, during the day.
And how does that work on the expense policy?
So that all of our calls are right at the border. Any calls that we receive or make. If we turn off roaming, you can't make a call or get a call. I mean, this is continuing to happen all of the time because I'm frequently in that area for reasons I won't mention. So how do you fix that? You fix it with having a different provider for us who live near the border? How are we going to fix it? I need an answer.
So thank you, Councillor Volpatti. Councillor Burrows still have the floor, actually, and in the interim, we'll try to get another response for you.
And I think I was on the same wavelength as Councillor Volpatti. How are we going to fix it? And to go out and get different providers and all of that, why don't we go to the company? It's not an issue of when you've just crossed the border. It's when you haven't crossed the border that concerns me. And I know we can fix it, and I know they may have already fixed it, but if we can get assurance from Rogers that that is not an issue, we still have to, they're still going to pick up the strongest tower.
Mr. Carter?
Mr. Chair, through the members of council, can I task the Director of IT to take the debate that's going on right now and come back with a plan to ensure that we have proper providers in place to ensure that the roaming is looked after, and we'll report back on this topic. I believe we can take this as a staff directive and come back with another information report or email out to all of councils with respect to this topic.
Great, fair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I'm the one that requested the separate vote, and I no longer require it.
Okay, thank you. With that, it has been separated, so Councillor Mays on number 5.
I just want to remind some staff that haven't been here long, when you become a counselor, you basically, someone from the region shows up and gives you a phone. I don't set up my plan. Someone brings you an iPad, someone brings you a computer, it's set up for you. And originally, you weren't given a choice. Here. Then they expensed it to us like as if we expensed all this stuff. But anyways, that's another story. So we don't go out and get our own plan. We don't manage our own plan. We get a bill every month just to have a look at to see if there's something excessive on there, I guess, that we could say, oh, hold on a second here. But it's regional staff who have set up this plan. I know that TELUS and Rogers and Bell, they all have a plan where you can add a $5 a day charge if you go out of the country. It's automatic. It only kicks in if you go out of the country. Why doesn't staff just fix the plan for the 30 counselors so that if you go out of the country, you get the $5 a day charge? And when we monitor it, if I get a $5 a day charge every single day and I know I never left the country, I can call staff and say, guys, I never left the country, so we shouldn't be getting this card. It should be that simple.
Thank you, Councillor. That's what I believe the suggested amendment does. So, seeing no other questions on number 5, Councillor Augustine.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. Just for clarity, again, we keep talking about cell phones, but I hope this applies, it does say it here, but I hope this does apply to iPads.
It does, yes.
Thank you.
Councillor Mays.
The amendment says we all got to call Rogers, and we've all got to call, this is on Rogers too, because it says members shall arrange.
Mr. Carter.
Yes, Mr. Chair, through the members of council. As I just said, staff will report back with some options. In the interim, if you could just maybe contact IT and they'll set up the appropriate account for you immediately. So there is options that we can set up the account, whether it's, as you just said, paying the $5 a month, so all roaming is included. Whatever those options are still available for all of councillors with respect to this policy.
Okay.
Okay, number 5, all in favor? Opposed, if any, that's carried. Thank you. Item 13, Councillor Height, you had asked for that to be separate.
Do you want me to speak to that? I'm
You'd like,
opposed to the red line. I think it's real clear without even the red line that states very clearly that no member shall use the facilities, the equipment. And Councillor Timms wants to speak about having a picture. I think that's going beyond. That's not using the resource. You're standing in front of a building. If he wants to use that in his campaign literature, God bless him. But the intent is really, we shouldn't be using our facilities, our equipment, and the red line stating a period of time, I don't think it should be done at any time. So I'm not in favor of the red, and I'll vote against that part of it, because that's part of what we're voting on. Black plus red, or just black. So I'm opposed to adding that red.
Okay, thanks for that. Councillor Mays, did you? No. Okay. Councillor Timms, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I am paying attention. So, I do want to speak in favor of the motion, but in favor of the red line, and in addition, add not commonly available to the public. So this eliminates any concerns about, standing on City Hall steps. And I've heard it in the middle of campaigns, and there can be great fuss about whether that's fair or appropriate and all that. So this simply makes it clear as to the intent. I understand Councillor Height's right that it's not a big deal, but I've seen it become a big deal in the middle of campaigns, so I just assume we'd be clear about this. So it would read, facilities, equipment, supplies, services, staff, or other resources of the Niagara region not commonly available to the public. So then anybody can take a picture in front of City Hall steps, incumbent or not, and it's real clear. And who knows how that's the example I can think of. But if the staff can put that in there, thank you. I think that does it. Include the words, facilities not commonly available to the public following resources of Niagara region, comma, not commonly, or whatever your grammar should be.
Okay.
Okay. And I hope that's not, I don't know if that's an amendment to the amendment, but however you want to treat it, Mr. Chairman, I appreciate the wording. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. So just to be clear on the process, the 20 that's before us, those were, if committee recall, they were kind of put aside in the parking lot, right? So they were never amendments that were put forward. They're here before us now for consideration of making amendments. And so we've been tasked as the committee to do this work for council's consideration. So I'm happy to take it. That's what we're here for. Councillor Quirk, you were the mover of the housekeeping items altogether. That includes 13.
I consider Councillor Tim's comment a friendly amendment to our original amendment, and I think I'm getting a thumbs up from the seconder. So that's a friendly amendment. It doesn't need to be voted on.
Very helpful. Thank you very much. Councillor Jeffs on this item.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just some clarification to what Councillor Timms is suggesting, because I thought in the Municipal Act that you can't be on any kind of municipal property for any of your brochures, pictures, anything like that. So I think Councillor Timms is saying that he wants to loosen this up then to allow, so you're saying an area, you mentioned like a water treatment plant or something is not a commonly available area, but I was under the impression that anything that had anything to do with municipal government was off limits in campaign literature, anything that you were doing in a municipal election. So I don't know if I can get clarity on that.
Yeah, so is there anything here that's contradictory to the Elections Act? Go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Jeffs. What I can suggest to you is that the amendment the friendly amendment not commonly available to the public is implied in the policy and then hence in the new legislation. So if you're at a park and you want to take a picture at a park, that park is available to the public for free. You want to have a rally at the park, you have to go through the municipality. If there's a fee, you have to pay the fee. So you can't have any special privileges as a candidate, is what the legislation is dictating. So if you want to have your picture taken on the front steps of City Hall for your campaign brochure, I'm not aware of anything that prevents you from doing that because the public has access to that. If you wanted to rent a hall for a rally or a campaign meeting and you expected to get that for free, then that would be in contravention of the policy.
Okay, if I can just follow up, because I know I had, when I ran the first time in 2010, I had a picture of myself reading to children at the library on my brochure, and I was told that had to be changed. Yeah, so this is why I'm asking these questions today, because based on that experience that I had, I feel like this is kind of contradicting, but
I will follow up.
Sure.
I'll double check it and then I'll confirm for all members of the committee.
Okay, great. All right, thank you.
Also, that in every local municipality has their own bylaws around this, and so, Waynfleet's might have been different versus other local municipalities. Councillor D'Angelo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't want to hold up the amendment, but I'd like this section of the expenses referred to. I'm not sure what that report name is, but it's supposed to come forward on May 1st. So if that could be looked at that point in time to make sure that we're following the correct procedures, and if there's any amendments that have to be made, that discussion could happen at that point in time. I just want that captured somewhere in here, that it gets referred to that report.
Mr. Carter, so there will be a review of this policy at that time, rather than hold the policy amendments up today?
No, just a second. Right, just this.
Go ahead.
Through you, Mr. Chair, it'll be just this section, and so if the members of the committee wish to table this section and refer it to consideration when the use of municipal resources policy during election year comes forward to members of council. That'll come sooner rather than later. It has to be in place before May 1st. And as I mentioned, the area clerks have been working on a common policy. So there's no harm in tabling this provision or removing it altogether at this point, but because it will be picked up in the other policy and the reference. Another option is just to reference in this policy the new policy that's going to be in place, because I understand the region hasn't had a policy in the past, and so they will in the near future.
I'm not sure if that helps you, Councillor.
Well, there's two options there, Mr. Chair. One is the table it and refer it. I don't want to do that. I want to move forward with this, but I want to make sure it's captured and reviewed with that policy to make sure that there's nothing out of the contrary that has to be brought forward. So however you want to word that, that's my intent. It's not to hold anything up. It's to make sure that it doesn't get lost when we have that discussion later.
Mr. Carter?
Yes, Mr. Chair, through the members of the committee, yes, we would still move forward with this policy with the literature included in the policy. However, it would be a directive to staff to bring this topic back up in the report before May 1st when it arrives.
Yeah, that satisfies my concern. Thank you.
Great, thank you. See no other questions on 13. All in favor? Opposed? If any, that is carried. Thank you. And item 14 as well has been asked to be voted on.
Yes, so can I give you the wording?
Yes, Councillor Volpatti, go ahead.
So I'm reading 14, but also including 15, so that's, change the submission for expense reports from 15 days to 30 days after each quarter.
Okay, thank you, Councillor.
If that makes sense, I mean, maybe it needs to be improved on, but
Councillor Quirk, did you want to speak to this as well?
Thank you, Chair. As I said before, I have no problem with this amendment. It was just the process because it was two separate issues. Councillor Volpatti has chosen to bypass the process to get hers in first, and that's okay with me. My only comment would be that this is for councillor submitted expenses, but we have expenses that we incur month over month that we still see, like our cell phone bills and that. Those would still get posted and still go up in a timely manner if a councillor chooses to not submit his expenses in a timely manner. And I just want to get clarification to that effect. So if, for example, just because I haven't filed my third quarter expenses, but I was at AMO for second quarter, so it's just at AMO during the third quarter, the AMO expenses will still get posted in accordance with the policy, even if I haven't submitted my own councillor submitted expenses. Is that the plan?
Mr. Carter?
Mr. Chair, through the members of council, any expenses that the corporation receives will be allocated. So for example, if you went through Jennifer and booked $400 for a conference, that payment would already be processed. If you come in quarterly with your mileage that we are unaware of, then that would be reported differently. So
Okay.
yes.
So I guess my issue here is the whole point of putting these expenses online is so that, again, we are self-governing our own expense policy. And we put them online so the public can be aware of what we're doing in a timely manner so that they can come back, and if they find, or if the press finds, or questionable expenses, they can ask us about them, or they can file a code of conduct complaint. If we violated our expense policy and they see a violation, then that would obviously be a code of conduct complaint. So I think we get a little bit hammered down on the penalty and policing phase of this, especially even when we go to cell phones. We get our cell phones now monthly from Kelly, so it's up to us to review them and make sure there aren't undue roaming charges or there aren't undue costs associated with them. So I think the point is, as long as the other expenses continue to be posted and you're not just having a big blank because someone has forgotten to file their expenses, and then if you haven't filed it within 30 days, the penalty was really a phone call from the press saying, what are you hiding? Why haven't you filed your expenses yet? And Councillor D'Angelo says, because I've got $10. I'm not going to waste the time with $10 of expenses. You know, those are the sort of things that this is a self-governing policy. It's not for staff to impose restrictions or penalties on council. This is a council policy. So I have no problem with supporting the motion here in this regard.
and that is reworded, Chair, and that's perfectly acceptable to me, and thank you to the clerk for doing that.
Okay, thank you. So again, this is 14 only. We're going to deal with 15 separately. So on this item, all those in favor? Opposed, if any, that's carried. Okay, thank you very much, committee members. That deals with the so-called housekeeping items. Yeah. So again, I'll open to the floor to committee. And so if we can follow the memo as outlined, number 3, the information items, there are several items that are there for information we can consider. Or Councillor Augustine, thank you, moving the information items. That's 3, 8, 10, 11, 15, 18, 20. I'll ask the clerk to note those as well. Seconded by you, Councillor Cork. Okay, thank you. I'm just going to get clarity on the speakers list for a moment.
What are we on, purple?
Okay, if it's okay with committee, we're going to start a new list with the information items that have just been moved. That's okay? All right, thank you. Okay. All right, thanks for your patience, committee members. Councillor Augustine.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. The one that's on here, and there might be others, the one that it says here, receive for information, is number 8 on Appendix 1, which is this code of conduct applies to members of council acting in their official capacity. Connect this section with acting in official capacity may need legal opinion. Can we just hear more about that one? It says receive for information. My recollection is the code doesn't currently say that because we haven't adopted changes to the code.
Ms. Kett.
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Augustine, as I understand it, the code does apply to members of council acting in their official capacity. It's a code that's approved by council, and it has to do with your conduct as a councillor. Legal may want to add something further if Ms. Gibbs is aware of anything different. Sorry.
My apologies through the chair. If you could please just clarify the question that you're seeking.
Sorry, I had just responded to the councillor that under item 8 in Appendix 1, that the code of conduct applies to members of council acting in their official capacity as members of council. That's the intent of the code of conduct.
Through the chair, yes, that would be the intent. I mean, specific to the councillor expense policy, there are provisions identifying that applies to councillors in their official capacity. That's consistent with Section 283 of the Municipal Act that speaks to that. There's only authority to reimburse expenses related to councillors acting in their official capacity. I don't know if that provides the clarification that you were seeking, but.
Councillor Augustine.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I guess what piqued my interest on this, and if Councillor Quirk might be able to comment on this, there was a proposal, that he put forward, and then it was referred, deferred, etc., to a new process supposed to be this fall about defining this specifically in the code, and we had quite a heated argument on it. So. I'm looking at the code now. It's an old code. It's the old code, the existing code, the one that's listed on the website. So, I guess what I'm asking, maybe I'll ask it this way, Mr. Chair. By accepting this as receiving for information, it doesn't necessarily mean that a councillor couldn't come forward and say, "Well, I disagree. I think it's 24/7." Whatever it is, it's just we're just receiving that because we had that big debate. I don't want to go into the debate now, Mr. Chair. I don't know who wants to respond to that.
What's the question?
Okay, well, maybe we should can we lift that one and vote on it separately?
We can, in fairness to you though, can you just repeat the question so we can try to get a response for you?
The question is this, and we had public presentations about it, so I don't necessarily want to go into it now. Some members of the public, other than to say that some members of the public believe that the existing code applies to counselors 24/7, and that it should. And as we're looking at the new code, there was a draft, or there was a code proposal for that, and then there was an amendment to the code that we looked at, and then all of that was deferred. So perhaps maybe the better thing to do would be to vote on this and just kind of defer that to the code discussion, as opposed to try and rekindle the discussion here, Mr. Chair.
Okay, I think you articulated it very well. It is a question we heard from legal already. The intent is that that would come forward. To your point, it hasn't yet in the code of conduct.
Right.
So you're asking, let's not deal with this now, wait until the code of conduct is completed?
That's what I'm suggesting.
Okay, that's fair.
Others may have a different idea, but so at least at minimum, if we could vote on it separately, and then we can deal with it then.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Timms.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just looking at item number 10, it refers to defined legal proceedings, and it says, according to Black's Law Dictionary 1999. My question is, are we able to rely on, or is the corporation relying on Black's Law Dictionary 1999? It would be helpful if, when we get to the code of conduct discussions and all those others, is that the one we're going to rely on for definitions of legal meaning?
So first of all, if I may, in fairness, it was a request from the previous committee meeting to define legal proceedings.
Yeah.
So staff, and thank you, have come up with a definition of legal proceeding. To your point, there may be other definitions elsewhere, so I'll ask the legal to comment.
Certainly, through the chair. So the other thing I want to bring to your attention is that legal proceedings in this issue is dealt with in the indemnification policy also. And the legal indemnification policy does outline what a legal proceeding is. So I think this was just for additional clarity with respect to what a definition is based on the request for clarification on the last occasion.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Maybe I'll ask staff. I'd like to see and use the Black's Law Dictionary because if staff's willing to rely on it for this discussion, staff may be willing to rely on it for other discussions. And I can just speak to staff and find this particular dictionary. So my question is then, will staff be relying on this when it comes to other discussions, specifically the code of conduct issue?
I'll let staff respond, but I'm not sure if it's a fair or appropriate question to be asked in this context. Go ahead.
Certainly, through the chair. So again, I believe that this reference was just provided as an information item for clarification. The legal indemnification policy specifically outlines what a legal proceeding is. So for these types of expenses, we would rely on the wording of the policy itself, the legal indemnification policy, as to what's a legal proceeding and whether the expenses are eligible. And this policy is providing the linkage to that one. So the comment is specific to this instance. As a general rule, staff applies interpretation based on the definitions that are within bylaws. In the absence of definitions, they may rely on the common dictionary definition. If it's a legal term, they would rely on a legal dictionary. But certainly, if there are questions that you have related to the code of conduct or a matter that's not before council at this time, I would prefer to address them in that context so I have a fuller understanding of the clarification you're seeking.
Okay, I guess I'll find Black's Law Dictionary 1999. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Maves.
Thank you. So this section 4.9 continues to concern me. I'd like to ask legal counsel, what are the penalties for someone making a false allegation or perjuring themselves in a code of conduct complaint against the counselor? No.
Which item
We're on
number?
4.9.
Which section number, Councillor Mays, if you can assist? Number 10?
So I'm, I don't know, 4.9C, 4.9A, B, and C, which is 10 and 14. No, 10 and 8 and 10.
8 and 10, okay, thank you.
Okay. I just want to know, on a code of conduct complaint, what stops someone from coming in and making a completely false allegation? What's the penalty if they make a completely false allegation to that person?
Through the chair. The intent of the code of conduct process is to allow people to bring forward issues that are investigated by the integrity commissioner, who is an independent and objective individual that will review the nature of the complaint and make a determination, including as to whether it's a frivolous or vexatious one.
What's the penalty?
There isn't a penalty.
There's no penalty for perjury. There's no penalty for making any kind of wild, crazy code of conduct and allegation against someone. So this continues to concern me. If a counselor has a meeting, Councillor Edgar has a meeting with a constituent, and it's a one-on-one meeting, and he tells the constituent, I'm really sorry, my hands are tied, I can't help you. That constituent gets angry, goes away and files a code of conduct complaint. They can make any allegation against the counselor they want. And the counselor now has to defend himself against that complaint. And how does the integrity commissioner know whether the allegation is wild and crazy and fabricated or not? He doesn't. So he's not going to rule on whether it's frivolous or vexatious. And so Councillor Edgar is going to incur legal costs because it's not ruled frivolous and vexatious. Because who does the integrity know who to trust? We have set ourselves up here for basically spending our entire salaries, probably in an election year, against all kinds of code of conduct complaints. Councillor Edgar, I just pulled any councillor out of the air. I could have, Councillor Maloney, who's more likely to probably have a tirade on somebody when they come to see him. My point is, we're restricting this to be subjective, that somehow the integrity commissioner has to know what happened between two people, and he has to decide if it's frivolous or vexatious. Someone could come in and, as a political ploy, file 10 code of conduct complaints about Councillor Hodgson. They could all be made up and frivolous and vexatious, but the integrity commissioner doesn't know that, so he won't rule that. So Councillor Hodgson now incurs, and his family have to incur all these legal expenses because we set up this political tool. So I don't like these restrictions on having legal costs covered on code of conduct complaints. And I've used I used the term myself, frivolous and vexatious, the first time I talked about it, but I think we're just setting ourselves up to incurring all kinds of expenses when people start filing complaints, especially in, as we all call it, what do we call it, crazy season or silly season when we get into an election year. So I don't like having restrictions on this. We need to be protected. And there is no way for integrity commissioner to know if someone is just making something up or not. So I want to just withdraw A and B, and I want to make sure we're covered. And I don't know, staff want to speak to that, but it gives me the willies.
So, okay, Councillor, it sounds like, I know you are touching upon section 8 and 10, which are for information, but I think to make the request that you're looking for, you're really talking about item 7, which we're going to be discussing for determination next anyway. So I'll leave it to you if you want to raise that to amend it or remove that piece when we consider section 7, or if you wish to put that forward now, because it does relate to 8 and 10 as well.
I'd like to put it forward now, but I kind of want the questions answered. If we removed A and B in that, what's the impact? And I want to make another point about Part C, which is there's already, what does that say? There's already any proceeding authorized law institute, a court or tribunal, if a defense. What happens if, I'm going to use the Councillor Edgar example that I started with. Someone makes a crazy allegation that's completely false. So Councillor Edgar hires legal, and the Integrity Commissioner doesn't declare it to be frivolous and vexatious. He's going to look into it. He hires a lawyer. He's now got legal expenses. What happens if it's a completely slanderous complaint and his lawyer says to him, your best defense is to go on the offense because this person is slandering you and you need to charge them with slander? That's a lawyer advising you that your best defense is an offense. My understanding is that that's not covered because it's not a defense. So this whole section, the more we talk about it, the more examples that I get floating around in my head, the more concerned I am on it, Chair. So I don't know. I don't know how to proceed.
Okay, Mr. Carter, I think, had some commentary on that.
Yes, Mr. Chair, through to members of committee. So staff's intention of this policy was to try and forecast potentials, exactly what you were just saying. There is, and I was speaking to Councillor Gale earlier, there is an appeal process. So for example, if something comes up or arises that maybe doesn't fall within this policy, it's 1 out of a million. There's that appeal process where it will go back to the audit committee. The audit committee as a whole will review it and then make considerations with respect to your submission or another councillor's submission. So there's still another process or an appeal process to this, where if there is something that comes out of left wing that maybe wasn't picked up in the policy, we go back collectively, present it, and then move forward with respect to if it's going to be covered or not. So there is that process and that appeal process in place.
See, I read the way it was written, and I was maybe too harsh the first time I mentioned this, but I read the way it was written that kind of staff looked at it and said, well, if you get a code of conduct complaint, you were a bad boy, and we shouldn't be protecting you legally if you were a bad boy. And that starts from the assumption that the code of conduct complaint was filed and you probably have some level of guilt. And it could be the exact opposite. And I just believe that we need to be protected from people who are going to abuse this process. And the longer people know it's out there, the more code of conduct complaints are filed. I can go into Councillor Easton's mayor's office and talk to her about a regional issue, and she can just tell me no, and I can get mad, and I can allege anything I want in a code of conduct complaint. And if the Integrity Commissioner has no idea, he wasn't there, he's not going to determine frivolous, vexatious, her and her family now have to pay to defend herself. And I think it should be without restriction. I don't think we should have ever put anything in here about the code of conduct.
Okay, Councillor, I think to try to move the agenda forward, if you'd like, as you stated, to remove 4.9A and B, I'll take that as in order because it is referenced as part of 8 and 10.
But Chair, I do need to know the implication because if we're left to just 4C and now we can only get coverage for a defense, what happens if my best defense is an offense?
Well, there was already a notation of an appeal process, Mr. Carter.
Again, Mr. Chair, through the members of committee, staff would receive whether it's invoices or statements, and then it would go through the appeal process, or maybe it's picked up through the indemnification policy. That would be your 2 avenues right now if you start removing topics out of this policy. And then there's also another topic that once the new code of conduct is presented to council, the same as what we're going to be doing in May for the elections report, that maybe these topics are corrected or with the new IC, that these topics that you're concerned about becomes incorporated in the new code of conduct policy. I believe that's where I think a lot of the literature should be identified in order for your topic to be reviewed.
So if we remove A and B, we've got coverage. So I think that's good. And then I think we need to figure out C down the road. Fair enough? So I would move that, Chair. Remove A and B.
Okay, so we have 3, 8, 10, 11, 15, 18, and 20 on the floor right now. This one relates to 8 and 10. So I'm happy to accept that, Councillor. Section 4.9A and B be removed. Seconded for that, Councillor Edgar, thank you. Any questions or comments on that one? Councillor Quirk.
Thank you, Chair. I agree wholeheartedly with Councillor Maeve's intent. I think removing A and B is problematic for me. I would have preferred to simply list that, legal costs arising in any way related to code of conduct complaints are eligible expenses. At that point, again, this is a self-governing policy. Your costs and expenses related to defense of code of conduct will be posted. You will have to defend your expenses to the public at large. But at the end of the day, I think it's also when you can say, yes, I had to defend myself because this was frivolous and vexatious. If you know a code of conduct complaint isn't frivolous and vexatious, I would hope that we would stand up and apologize for whatever code of conduct violation we've made, or follow the code of conduct process. But I think reasonable costs incurred for defending yourself against a code of conduct complaint are legitimate. And I say reasonable, and that's up for the council and the public decides. I have a concern with removing it wholeheartedly because it actually does say A and B, leaving C and D in there. I'm worried that the other expenses will not be accepted because they're not enumerated within this policy. So that's my only concern with removing them wholeheartedly. I would prefer to list item A and say they are eligible expenses, and then legal costs related to personal conflict of interest 100% should not be covered by the taxpayer. But the item A, I believe, should be an eligible expense as a councillor, especially when you see the frivolous and vexatious ones that are starting to flow through this council already, and we've already had a couple dismissed as disingenuous.
Councillor Easton on this matter.
Mr. Chairman, the issue of some members of council being included in a hearing, not knowing as a result of a quorum, your position in quorum, I think is also part and parcel of this and how extensive the reach is. So I agree with Councillor Maeve's concerns, and I agree that A should remain, but there have been a number of unusual circumstances. It could be that the result or the response was a knee-jerk response. I don't know. I wouldn't like to think that there was anything about that was anything except a knee-jerk response, which in any other situation would have been thought out differently. But certainly people have suffered in this last year, there's no question about it, from a variety of circumstances. So we need to vet this out. But I mean, it happens within our own counselors. I mean, does anyone expect to get a notice saying that you have to turn up at the courtroom a week from now? You don't know whether you're supposed to get a lawyer. You don't know whether you have any backup or not. You can't get information. I think the whole system is extremely, it's unfettered in the sense that you don't know where you stand as a counselor. So if you were a person doing your due diligence and you were planning to run for election, these are questions that you should be asking. And certainly if you could be confronted with significant legal charges without any, I mean, you couldn't even imagine what they might be based on the individual interpretation. I think that would be a real concern. I think it will limit people's goodwill in terms of coming forward to be involved in public service. So I would like to see this minimally addressed here And then again, as Mr. Carter has referred to, that we have a much more comprehensive discussion before it's completely finalized. Because I have different views about the code of conduct than some people do, but I think this issue of legal expenses has to be sorted out. And we need different kind of advice, different level advice. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Mays?
So, Chair, on my own amendment, I take Councillor Quirk's suggestions. I think they're very interesting. I'd like to know from legal counsel, which way do we have greater protections?
So, Mr. Carter, Ms.
By,
perhaps
we could just amend it by taking out the letters IN, where we say they're ineligible, and just, and specifically leave them in as being eligible, which is basically Councillor Quirk's suggestion.
So the question was, Ms. Gibbs, which scenario offers greater protection for councillors if 49A and B are completely removed, or if 49A is changed to eligible expenses instead of ineligible?
Thank you, through the chair. So again, I want to refer council to the legal indemnification policy that already exists and has been in place for some time. So that already speaks to the circumstances in which the corporation would provide reimbursement or support with respect to legal action that is commenced against a councillor acting in good faith in the course of their normal duties. That policy already exists. And is separate, but was appended to this report. With respect to the code of conduct issue, I think in part the reason why staff had indicated that they were ineligible expenses was for clarity, because technically a code of conduct investigation is not a legal proceeding, and the legal indemnification policy only applies to legal proceedings. So certainly if it's council's desire to expand the scope of coverage from the corporation to apply to code of conduct type expenses, then they should add that to this policy.
Okay,
if that's the direction they're seeking, but other types of legal proceedings would be dealt with in accordance with the legal indemnification policy that's already in place.
So I would withdraw my suggested amendment in preference to Councillor Quirk's amendment, which would be to strike the letters IN in both A and B.
Councillor Burrows, I believe you were the seconder.
It was Councillor Edgar.
Councillor Edgar, I'm sorry. Councillor Edgar, are you fine with that adjustment? That's okay. So,
code of conduct complaint.
So, Councillor Maves would like to adjust the amendment from removing A and B. Yes, sir. Okay, thank you. Councillor Maves.
That's it. Thank you.
Councillor Gale.
Thank you, Chair. I'll be real quick. I'm just putting it out there that during that time, I apologize for that integrity complaint for my shut up comment. I had to battle with lawyers on the Integrity Commission so I could just get up here and say it. They wanted to interview me. That's $600 an hour. I did the math with my lawyers, and I paid for my lawyers on it. And it was about $4,000 that I would have argued you guys pay or whatever. So I'd be cautious that everybody can afford this type of stuff, because I wanted to just get up and put it to bed and say, sorry, move on. And they battled with me that they had to investigate me. They had to come down and see it, and things like this. And I said, you do what you want. I'm apologizing. You watch the video. And then they came back and said, we're moving on. But I don't know if the other people in here have the finances or the power to do what I did, because I had my lawyers behind me too saying, just move on. So, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Augustine.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. First, I want to say that I agree with the amendment, and I think, you know, when we look at policy, we always have to look at it without, like, sort of generally, right? So, what is the overall policy in general, as opposed to specifics? And I think some of the discussion that we've had before in this matter may have been tainted by specific elements. So I agree with the amendment, again, as you know, Councillor Easton stated and others have stated, Councillor Maves, in general and for general policies, or in a general policy area, so I agree with that. I do have a question for our lawyer, and you may say that this isn't part of A and B, Mr. Chair, but it is. She did mention about the indemnification policy. I'm trying to find it. It doesn't appear to be here, and I know it was on previous reports. My recollection of the indemnification policy was that it was for defense costs, and Councillor Maves made the comment that sometimes the best defense is a good offense. Maybe through defense, your lawyer might recommend that. So can we get some clarity from legal counsel on that?
Yes, Ms. Gibbs?
Thank you, through the chair. So the policy, I believe, was attached to the original council expense review policy considerations report as an appendix. It lists the types of costs that are covered. One of them is advice and representation in defending a proceeding, advice and representation in appeal of a legal proceeding, settlement of a legal proceeding, and advice and representation prior to commencement of a legal proceeding in situations where there's a potential for the commencement of a legal proceeding. And then it also lists types of things that wouldn't be covered, such as unnecessarily high costs. So I think there is scope there for if the advice was properly incurred, and again it triggered the application of the policy for a claim to be submitted. Everything is very fact specific, but certainly it's broad enough to cover different types of costs. And then again, as has been noted previously, D, which is in the policy before you now, so section 4.9D, provides you with further comfort, I believe, as it relates to your concern, because it indicates requests for reimbursement of legal costs outside this policy or the legal indemnification policy shall be submitted to the audit committee for recommendation to council. So there is that further opportunity. If there was a question as to whether it was really covered by the policy, you could still make that submission.
Okay, that's very helpful. I appreciate that. Mr. Chair, could our legal counsel just, she said 5 things there. Can we hear the third one again? There's defense.
Director Gibbs?
I'm sorry.
Through the chair, certainly. So this policy applies to the following types of costs. This is page 3 of 6 of the legal indemnification policy. Legal or paralegal fees, including disbursements and taxes for advice or representation prior to the commencement of a legal proceeding in situations where basically a commencement of a legal proceeding is expected. B is legal or paralegal fees for advice or representation in defending a legal proceeding. C is legal or paralegal fees for advice and representation in an appeal of a legal proceeding.
Okay.
D is administrative penalties. E is fines. F is damages. G is settlement.
Okay, thank you. So it sounded like maybe it would be under A, but it's also covered under A on that policy, but also D here. So I'm satisfied with the response. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. So to be clear, what we're voting on is changing 49A and B from ineligible to eligible expenses. All those in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Thank you very much. Go back to the previous list, speakers list. Okay. Councillor Quirk.
Thank you, Chair. I just had a couple, this is just to the information items, and thank you to Councillor Maves and committee for dealing with 8 and 7 clearly and concisely. My couple questions, was there any consideration to the discussion around the level of per diem and including that value right in the policy? That per diem rate has been there since at least 2001 when the original policy was pushed out. I don't know, the original staff policy that we were to use is in there. I leave that open for discussion. I think it should probably be up to at least $5 per category there to be keeping up with a little bit of inflationary pressures.
Sorry, Councillor, before you go too far down that path, that's an item for consideration, item number 2.
I'm sorry, I have item as a 3. Oh, I'm sorry, because 2 and 3 are listed here as both things. So my apologies. I'll save that for item 3. My apologies. Item 8's been dealt with. Item 15 has been dealt with. I actually think I'm happy. Thank you.
You got that on the record. Thank you. Councillor Timms.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was going to speak to the same issue about the per diem, so I'll wait for that and try and pay attention.
Okay, so
that point.
we'll close the loop on the outstanding information items as listed in number 3 in the memorandum. All those in favor? Councillor Augustine.
I apologize. I did ask for a separate consideration of number 8.
You did. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. So all the items listed aside from number 8, and I believe you wanted that one deferred. Okay, so all the items except number 8, all in favor? Councillor Quirk.
Point of order. Councillor Maves made an amendment that incorporated 7 and 8, and now we're talking about deferring 8. So I just want to make sure that when we capture the intent of the motion that we're passing, that we actually, through Councillor Maves' amendment, brought number 7 into this list, as we did with 15 before, and that we are, if we want to defer any discussion about the official capacity portion of it, that is actually a separate issue, right?
Yeah,
Because
so the official capacity discussion will occur at the Code of Conduct meeting. And when that's resolved, then it will be reflected here.
And I just want to make sure, because if we're going to pull up 8 separately, I don't want that to be taken, that Councillor Maves' amendment that passed would be deferred either.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, so the balance of items, all in favor? Opposed, if any? Thank you very much. Item number 8, Councillor Augustine.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So just that we refer the language here that staff are recommending that we receive for information. So nothing about 4.9A, but just the language around that, and just refer it to that Code of Conduct discussion whenever that happens.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Quirk. Seconded. All in favor of the deferral, please put your hands up or keep your hands up. Opposed, if any? That's carried. Thank you. Thanks, everyone, for your patience going through this. So if we follow item number 4 in the memorandum, there are some additional items for us to consider. I think we take these one at a time at this point. Councillor Quirk, I'm happy to look to you and or Councillor Timms, because you started to speak about item number 2, and that's with respect to the per diem rate.
Thank you, Chair. If it's okay for moving item 2 with the, my recommendation is that each of those categories be moved by $5, which would bring it up to the average per diem amount of $85. I'm hoping Councillor Timms would second that.
That's moved, seconded by Councillor Timms. It's fine. Okay. Councillor Quirk, you still have the floor right now. If you're fine.
Oh, yeah, sorry. If Councillor Timms wants to speak to it, that's for sure.
Okay, Councillor Timms.
Well, just a question of what the other, and I think you answered it here, other municipalities are using the $85 number, and that's what's mentioned in item 4.
Yes, the average per diem amount is $85.
Okay. I think that just needs to be clear. That's what we're going to. Thank you.
Okay, Councillor Height.
Yes, through the staff, if we're going to increase this to $85 for counselors, should this not be the same for staff, and that's to the CAO?
That may be out of this committee's purview, but allow the CAO to answer that question.
I'm concerned that if we make a decision to give us more when we're out of town, it's unfair to staff.
Okay, let's hear a good response.
That's what I want to hear from staff about.
Through Chair to Councillor Height, thanks for the question. We're actually doing, I've assigned a staff person to look at all our corporate policies. This is one of them. And then we would make the changes as we get to that policy review. So we'll consider moving it from 65 to 85. It'd be a budget matter. We want to make sure we can afford it.
Thank you.
Okay, seeing no other speakers, all in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Thank you. Item number 7 has been dealt with. We go to C, which is item 16. There is a suggested amendment. I'll look to committee if they feel it appropriate to make any amendment on item 16. Councillor D'Angelo.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I like the where the direction we're moving into regarding setting a budget for the councillors. The only concern I have is there's a save and accept mileage, conference, and convention expenses. I'd like to see it amended that conference and convention expenses are included in our budget. Mileage is a little bit difficult to encapsulate properly because we all come from different parts of the region, and I know I'm one of the closer ones, so it's to set a budget on that makes it a little bit more difficult. But in terms of conference convention expenses, I think we need a budget. It would help when we go back to the very first one where it talked about eligible expenses in section 4.3 where it talked about make every attempt to. So if you go to a conference and unfortunately you may book late and it's has a higher cost for airfare, it still comes out of your budget, but you have limited budgeted funds in what you can do the rest of the year, so you have to take that into consideration. So it allows you to be a little bit more prudent and plan properly. So I believe that I'd like to make the amendment that conferences and convention expenses are now part of the budget. I don't know if they're included. I need, I guess, a staff question here where they break down and set the $3,500 for the members. Where does that number come from? And does that include, because it says 105,000 for council expenses. What's the budget for conferences right now? If someone could maybe answer that question for me.
Yes, okay. So first off, the $3,500 that's been allocated per counselor in this draft did not include conferences. So I'll look to, I think, CAO first.
All right, through you, Chair, to Councillor D'Angelo. And I respect the comments you're making. We've excluded conferences just because we're of the understanding that some councillors may be charging a conference to either their local municipality, so they may go, so a mayor may charge it to his mayor's account. Also, if there's a regional council who sits on a board or an agency, they may go on that expense. So what we purposely took it out of the budget in order to ensure there's a level playing field for all of the councillors and not advantage one who is going on another agency's expense.
But that doesn't answer my question. How much is in that account for conferences?
So they don't have that answer currently. They'll have to get that answer. It sounds like it's currently combined. Go ahead.
Through the chair, the total budget for a number of items, including conference expenses, is 85,000. We've never really dug into how much of that 85,000 is for council expenses versus meals versus other items, but the total total comprehensive budget is 85,000.
That's for conferences, okay. I'd still, because I know sitting on a municipality, when we sat there, we didn't have an unlimited budget. We had it set up so that certain councillors could go every year. I know the mayor usually had a budget for that, but I'd like to see us put a budget in for that because to me, it's like anything else with staff. They have budgets in there for conferences and for educational purposes. I think that should be encapsulated as part of the conference cost, should be encapsulated as part of the budget. The 3,500 is a good start and a good direction. If you use the 85,000, divide that by the 30 councillors, then you could add that on and we could see how the first year budget goes. And at that point in time can work forward from that, developing a more realistic budget. But I think when you leave it open-ended, someone could go to several conferences while others don't. And then when do you stop the 85,000? Have we ever maxed out the 85,000 in terms? Yeah, so there's actually, if the CEO is nodding his head that we've gone over the 85,000, so we lack control in controlling the amount of conferences we attend. So with a budget figure in there, then that can actually be scaled back a bit so everyone's looking at it, making sure that they go to the proper conference that allows them to educate themselves and become a little bit more proficient at the council meetings, and also bring that information back to the other councillors. So I'm not sure if the 85,000 divided by 30 is the correct answer, I'm looking for staff of what they would like to recommend since they brought this one forward.
Okay, so first to be clear, this item, section 5.2F, that currently states each year, this is the policy that council's already approved, each year incorporate budget dollars in the annual budget for council to consider for funding or reimbursing members' eligible expenses. So we have in section 16, item 16, there is some suggested wording, and in the memorandum, there is also some suggested wording. So to be clear right now, Councillor, so far you've been asking questions, but the status quo is still is what's in the policy. CAO?
Thank you, Chair. And to Councillor D'Angela, what we could do is during our budget deliberations forward it. I think the number we were discussing was 2 conferences per year for councillors, and that would be the budget number. So we considered AMO and FCM. But it varies because they're at different locations. If they happened in Niagara, that'd be a bonus. So that's what we're going for, 2 conferences per councillor per year. And that was kind of the budget framework we're looking at. But we can calculate that and present it to council during budget deliberations.
Okay, well, can we not get that do we not have that calculations formulated right now? Because there's a recommendation here that came forward from staff regarding dividing the 105. I'd like to make that, if possible, a decision here. Then we could just say 2 conferences, add that in, and then you could come back with a number that's an average cost of that can be associated with that. So I'd be comfortable to putting the motion on the floor that it's 3,500 plus 2 conferences. Because the number, I'll let staff work out the number depending on some averages and what it's been over the last few years.
Okay, thank you. So in Appendix 1, Section 16, you like the wording there, minus mileage, but including 2 conferences.
That is correct.
Okay. Is there a seconder for that? Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Hodgson seconding that. Okay, thank you. Councillor Quirk, you're next on the list. Yes, this is to item 16. Yes, that's right.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, I'm speaking against the amendment because I actually have a problem with the including mileage and maybe not also including cell phones. I live in Grimsby and almost all of Niagara is long distance for me. The other options are to use my own phone and get the $40 per month rebate. I think it's incumbent on us. We are self-policing this policy, and we are self-policing it by publishing it so that the public and our constituents know what it costs, the full costs of having me as their Grimsby Regional Councillor. I think when we do arbitrary limits like this, and also we've just now included legal expenses as an eligible expense. So now all of a sudden your $3,500 could be used up with 2 phone calls to a lawyer if that's what it's going to take to control the expenses. So I have a fundamental problem with setting a limit at this time at such a low amount for the work that we do as councillors. So I'm going to be voting against putting any arbitrary limit on that until we have a greater grasp of what the costs are. That we also have some people who do go to conferences and some who don't. It also gives an unfair advantage to the mayors who sit on council because they can expense conferences through their municipality rather than through the region. So unless we want to set up a level of 2-tier responsibilities for our councillors, I can't support this motion.
Thank you, Ms. Catt.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to offer some clarification to help you with your discussion. So section 5.2F of the policy, which is page 7, says each year incorporate budget dollars in the annual budget for council to consider for funding or reimbursing members' eligible expenses. So then we go and we take a look at what the eligible expenses are set out under section 4.7. And that includes memorabilia and souvenirs for constituents, mobile devices, office supplies, promotional material related to regional business, etc., subscriptions, 1 ticket per event, the GO train ticket, 407 costs, and parking related expenses. So your telephone charges are not a part of this, and neither is mileage or conferences and but that has now been amended to include 2 per member.
Sorry, sorry, just to follow up on that comment, I thank for input, but our phone expenses are reimbursed as eligible expenses, but whether it's a mobile device provided by the region or whether we claim the $40, it is separately included in our expenses. In fact, we've talked about that with respect to roaming charges and all that. So with respect, through you, Chair, my point is I don't think it's necessary to put a per councillor limit on the budget while we don't even know what the history with this new expense policy is going to be yet. So I think it's arbitrary and quite frankly punitive to those who attend conferences and provide representation for the region.
Councillor Timms.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The amendment seems to be a little bit unnecessary, given that we've added to this process the publication of expenses on the website. So it seems to me a little bit of micromanaging councillors' own, each councillor's conduct or each councillor's effort to be as informed and educated or participate in things like AMO, or I used to go to Association of Local Public Health of Ontario, and how would that fit into this, back when the chair of public health. Those are all areas and conferences that this council needs to participate in, including FCM and AMO, but there are others. If we have a member on the AMO executive, how does that fit in, as in Councillor Grenier? So I think it's unnecessary because we are going to be publishing expenses, and so the public will judge whether or not we're abusing the expense account. I think that this is just going a little bit too far in terms of trying to micromanage a member's efforts as a councillor to participate in whatever area of municipal governance we need to participate in. So in short, I'm opposed to the motion at this point because we are publishing, and the public will judge us. Our voters will judge us based on how we spend our accounts, and it's be self-explanatory. So I don't think we need to restrict this. I think it's important for members to get out in the rest of the province and participate in conferences and associations, and to bring both the Niagara message to the rest of the province and learn from the rest of the province for the benefit of Niagara. So I'm opposed to the motion, to the amendment anyway. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Maves.
Thank you, Chair. I'm opposed to both the amendment and the concept, right now especially. As I said before, if someone has legal charges that are $8,000, now that person that just made the concern we had about legal expenses redundant, because now his expenses will exceed, his or her expenses will exceed $3,500, and now they're back paying for that. When the new council comes in, I also mentioned this earlier, your staff show up with phone for you, with an iPad for you, they show up with a printer for you, and the first year your expenses just on electronics is over $4,000. So I can just see us getting into this and having exception after exception after exception, and it becomes a huge spider web. I think we should allow this to be something that one of our committees looks at over time and in the future to come up with caps, and they can come forward with a full consideration of what should be in and what should be out. But at this point in time, with a new expense policy, to start down this new road of all these different restrictions and 2 conferences or 3 conferences, I think I would just put this over until, I don't know, the 2018 council comes in or something. So I'm going to be opposed to this and the amendment in general. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Height.
Yes, Councillor Maves captured most of what I was going to say, but I can let council know this, that when Councillor Rigby found out that his iPad and iPhones were being billed to him as an expense, he said, take them all back and got his own. So that's an example of $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 right off the bat. So I'm with Councillor Maves.
Thank you, Councillor Nunziata.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm not going to belabor the point. You know, there's new policies and regulations that have been in the process of being created at the provincial level, which calls for greater accountability, greater education opportunities for the different boards and committees that we as councillors sit on, whether it's Niagara Peninsula Conservation Authority, whether it's the Niagara Police Services Board. Part of the new legislation requires learning opportunities and education in those particular endeavors. I don't see any funding source coming from the province to accommodate those learning opportunities. So for those reasons alone, I'm not going to be supporting this. I think it's incumbent that if we have opportunities to broaden our knowledge base when it comes to effectively being the conduits of the community, then I don't see the benefit of putting a cap on it. When those learning opportunities come up, it's up to each individual councillor whether or not to take advantage of them. I think at the end of the day, we're trying to do the best that we can. And when those opportunities present themselves, well, then that's a choice that we all make.
Okay, thank you. With that, there's no other speakers. I'll call the question on the amendment before us. All in favor? Councillor Volpatti. Recorded vote has been requested. I'll look to the clerk to open the vote when ready. Okay, thank you. That did not carry. So if committee wants to move on, there is still the section in there that speaks to council setting up a budget for council expenses on a kind of global basis. So we could move on to item 17. There is a suggested amendment there as well in the memorandum. Go ahead, Councillor Diedaddy. Duly noted, thank you. So is there any, there is a suggested amendment for item 17. Councillor Quirk, thank you.
Chair, I'd move the alternative wording for consideration.
That's in the memorandum?
That's in the memorandum.
Thank you. We'll ask for it to be put on the screen. Is there a seconder for that? Seconded by Councillor Nunziata, thank you.
That's not it.
17.
Is that it, Councillor Quirk? Okay. Councillor Nunziata seconded, thank you. Any questions or comments to this one, Councillor Nunziata?
Yeah, just a thank you to staff for bringing forward a more objective definition of regional business. I think it's important to make sure that we eliminate as much gray as possible. So thank you for staff for bringing this forward. I fully support the definition that at least provides more clarity and certain more black and white to that term.
That it would be allowed.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Nunziata, go ahead.
Well, point of personal privilege, thank you.
Anyone going anywhere, if they're invited, this opens up that policy that I could be invited anywhere to come to a talk show. Would this allow me to go at the expense of the region?
Okay, CAO.
Through Chair to Councillor Height, my response is that is at the discretion of the councillor and his or her individual expenses that will be reported. So staff are not going to police those type of expenditures.
So a follow-up supported. We don't even need this added. If a councillor feels it's incumbent on them representing their community to go anywhere to represent them, so be it, and I don't agree with the amendment, so I'm voting against it and would like a recorded vote.
Thank you, Councillor. It is an item that regional business wasn't previously defined. We have an opportunity to define it here. Councillor Quirk.
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to support the amendment because I actually see the benefit of promoting Niagara and different media outlets across the province and across the country, and in fact, opportunities to participate in international media as well. In fact, the whole Amazon relocation has been the subject of many news broadcasts across North America. So I would hope that we would take any advantage we have to do that. Keeping in mind that, again, it's self-governing. Your expenses are published. The people of Grimsby will judge me based on my expenses, and I'm happy to talk to any of my constituents and explain to them the costs involved in being a regional councillor, and I don't apologize for it. All I say is that I try to spend the taxpayers' money very reasonably and make sure that it's not to excess, and that there is a cost for government, and part of that cost is a regional councillor. Some people don't like it. Some people think we're overpaid. As if we get $1, we're overpaid. But at the end of the day, I think the whole discussion about trying to tighten up a policy because you don't agree with the work that the other councillors are doing in their capacity as a regional councillor it can be perceived as being a little bit petty. I have been invited on the roundtable at 610 CKTB many times because I'm a regional councillor. They never called me up before I got elected, so I'm only there because I'm a regional councillor. And on the roundtable, we've discussed nothing to do with regional business. So that happens from time to time. But at the end of the day, we get mentioned as Niagara regional councillors. People know where the Niagara region is, and when we can promote our issues and bring it round. I know that the pittance we pay to send the mileage to send one of our councillors to Toronto is nothing compared to what it would cost to put Niagara region on the air 6 times to support the radio traffic or something, the traffic radio in terms of advertising. So I think it's money well spent, and when we can do that and be ambassadors for this region, I don't think we should ever have to apologize for it. That's our role as regional councillors, to be ambassadors for all the good that is happening in the region. Sometimes it's hard to believe that any good is done the way some people complain.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Timms.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just want to go back to the point about publishing our expenses online. Sets up a self-policing, and then councillors are clearly accountable to their constituency for how they spend the region's expenses. And the other point was down the bottom line where it says example, economic, tourism, environmental. I guess we could go on and on about, say, public health or the Great Lakes. There are many examples we could put there. The intent is any jurisdiction where the region has business would be intended to be included in this list of examples. So I don't really need an amendment, but just to make that point, that anything we're involved with is what we're intending here in terms of indirectly or directly benefits the Niagara region or promotes the Niagara region. I think it's intended to be a wide open scope, and again, we'll be judged by our constituents about how we spend our time and our money. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Augustine.
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. I will not be supporting the amendment, and I think that for a couple reasons, for the exact reasons that people who are supporting it, and let me explain. The first is, Mr. Chair, the way the policy is now, or as recommended prior to this amendment, is broad. This one is actually written to be very specific, except for some wiggle room in here. We actually heard on the point of personal privilege, Mr. Chair, where the councillor that said that his privilege was expunged or whatever, or not expunged, but his personal privilege wasn't adhered to, actually thanked staff for putting this in. And when I spoke earlier about, and I apologize if I got that wrong, and I stand to be corrected, but when I mentioned earlier about a policy
privilege,
is...
Mr. Chair.
Councillor Annunziata, go ahead.
Just to correct the member, Councillor Augustine's comment, I didn't ask staff to put this in.
Thank you.
If you recall, it was a very robust discussion of changes or amendments we'd like to see. And I brought up at that particular time more details around regional business. Thankful that staff came back with a bit more detail with respect to regional business.
Okay, thank you, and I'm sorry if I offended the councillor, and I appreciate him clarifying that. But I think the point that's important here is that what's been added is actually more specificity as opposed to something more general. And when we publish it online, as Councillor Tim spoke about, a councillor or the media can request, or a member of the public, and a councillor can say, well, there it is, it's in the policy, as opposed to should it be, shouldn't it not be, etc. So we heard that those kind of things are covered if we accept this amendment. And so under Councillor Tim's comment, well, the media will come up and ask you about it, well, the response will be, well, it's covered. Whereas it actually takes away from the self-governing part of it if we make it this specific. So I'm not in support of this. The third reason, Mr. Chair, is because it talks about this directly or indirectly. I don't know what that means. Activity, event that's going to indirectly benefit Niagara Region or indirectly promote Niagara Region. I don't know what that means. I know what directly means. So, Mr. Chair, I think we should vote against this. I think we should leave it in the language that it currently is, which in my opinion is broad and does encapsulate what we should be doing. Where is it here? The original wording is saying anything that's regional business, and then we defend that means attends an event as representative to derive benefit from Niagara Region or to advance the interests of Niagara Region. You know, I think that's broad enough, and I think we should leave it at that. And then when the expenses are posted, we defend it. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Maves.
Chair, a question to you. I think earlier we deferred or referred official capacity discussion. Where did we refer that to?
That was to be held in abeyance until after the Code of Conduct is approved by Council, and that determination will be made whether that item is included or not.
So is the official capacity definition debate discussion occurring with the Code of Conduct?
It is. It's still ongoing.
Isn't this closely related, and why wouldn't we refer this same issue to that discussion?
It is, and you are correct, yeah.
Okay, I would move to refer the amendment to the same committee.
Okay, referral has been moved. Seconder for that. Seconded by Councillor Edgar. Thank you. Call the question on the referral. All in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Thank you very much. So thank you, committee members. That exhausts the list that we have before us. We just have one more item to close the loop on this, and that is to, maybe the clerk can put it on the screen.
Sorry, Chair. Just as a question, as this goes from committee to council next Thursday, how do you envision capturing the amendments that we've put forward to refer to the entire council? I don't want to necessarily go through each of these individual appendix items again, if that is going to be the will of council. Is there a way to succinctly capture what the recommendations that we put forward are?
Yeah, so I'll allow staff a moment to think about that response. In the interim, just to close the loop, that the committee, the committee recommend approval as amended. It would be appropriate. Is there a mover and seconder for this item? Thank you, Councillor Quirk. Seconded by Councillor Diodati. Thank you. All in favor? Opposed, if any? That's carried. Thanks very much. With respect to your question, Councillor Quirk, Mr. Carter, go ahead.
Mr. Chair, through the members of committee, it is identified that within the memo that's received that it is intended that staff will include the final red line revision of the draft policy for regional council in order that they can easily identify the changes considered and made by the committee. So we'll be doing another red line revisions with respect to these directions today, Mr. Chair.
If I may, what might be also helpful, please, through you, Chair, is a revised memo that explains each of these ones that were passed and the changes that were made through that process so that everyone knows exactly what we did here, ourselves included.
Okay, thanks for that. I want to take the opportunity again to thank staff. I know there's a lot of work put into this throughout the process to get us here, and still more to come to get to council, and also committee's work. I know there's a lot of time spent on this, so thanks for your patience throughout that process. We do have two more items of business. One is GM 9 2017. That's the Review of Municipal Elections Modernization Act, composition of regional council. It's perhaps moved by Councillor Joyner.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd love to move it, but I'm not a member of the Corporate Services Committee.
Oh, well, you should be. Councillor Timms, Councillor Diodati, moved and seconded. Thank you. Any questions or comments then on this report? Councillor Maves?
Chair, what's the process, if someone could remind me going forward with this?
Acting Deputy Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The process, are you speaking about the increased composition
Yes.
of council? So the process is identified on page 7 of the report. So we've now received the written regulation from the minister's office, and the act requires that we give public notice and that the council hold a public meeting in advance of consideration of the bylaw. The notice has to be given at least 10 days in advance. And if council passes the bylaw, which will be considered at the same meeting as the public meeting is held, the notice is sent to the area municipalities and the triple majority must be accomplished. So the area municipalities will then have to pass a resolution consenting to the bylaw.
So just as I'm going through the numbers, and Councillor Joyner, I'm happy to hear his comments on this, but Niagara Falls will have one councillor for every 22,000 people. West Lincoln will have one councillor for every 7,000 people. Are we going to move to 1 to 7,000 for all municipalities? What's the direction? 14,000 people divided by 2 councillors.
So to the acting deputy clerk, maybe if you as well can highlight the process with respect to any other conversation around additional seat changes, would have to be held in abeyance, I believe, until after the next election, aside from what's before us today.
That's right. That's correct, Mr. Chair. But in terms of the population, the act is quite specific that you have to use the number of eligible voters at the end of election day from the previous election. So on page 5, there's a breakdown of the population and eligible electors for counts or for committee's information. And then the triple majority requires a majority of the area municipalities to pass a resolution. And in this particular case, it's at least 7. So, and then the second part of that equation is that the total number of electors in area municipalities that passed resolutions consent to the bylaw form a majority of electors in the Niagara region.
CAO.
Thank you, Chair. And further to that, in response to Councillor Maves, your question was, could you change the composition for the city of Niagara Falls to go to the same ratios? The response is that you can make, currently under the current legislation, you can make that request to the minister and receive his approval. But post, I forget the September 31st, then it's up to regional council. You can make those changes to the composition. So to answer your question, do you change the composition for the city of Niagara Falls to match the ratios of West Lincoln? That's currently a decision of the minister. However, once the legislative changes are enacted, that'd be a decision of regional council.
That's right.
So regional council can have
Yeah, what?
No, it's okay if you wanted to add to that.
I do need to add to that. The ministry only has allowed us to add an additional person to West Lincoln at this time. If we require additional, we would like to make changes, on a per capita basis, we would have to file another request to the ministry.
And that's not part of this direction.
That's right.
And this would be for the 2018 election.
Correct.
All right, so I have pause for concern here. Niagara Falls is getting representation of 1 to 22,000 people, one counselor for every 22,000 people. And it's further enhancing effectively our underrepresentation on council. And we can all kind of sit around and start doing the math, and Fort Erie's 1 to 12, we're 1 to, Fort Erie's 1 to 15, we're 1 to 22. Grimsby's 1 to 14, and so on. We're kind of all over the map. St. Catharines is also 1 to 20. So I don't think I can support this right now. I think that this needs a broader discussion. I'd prefer that we were going in the opposite direction rather than increasing. I'd prefer to see us decreasing. Or any other number of changes. So, Chair, do I need to pull this section to vote on E separately, and the rest of the item? What's your advice?
Vote on that.
Yeah,
Or to split the recommendation? Sure.
thank you.
Yeah, you can split the recommendation.
So it's just being received for information, Counselor. The only action item is to direct the clerk to schedule the associated public meetings. So also to be clear, and for the other speakers coming forward, council has already made the decision, and the minister has approved it. So it's not re-debating the additional seat. It's been approved by council. So any discussion I would say take a reconsideration. And also, we couldn't do that here at this committee. It had to be done at council. So today we are discussing whether we direct staff to provide the appropriate notice in associated public meetings.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Augustine.
Thank you. I saw that Councillor Joyner wanted to speak. There were some questions, so I'd be willing to relinquish the floor momentarily for Councillor Joyner, Mr. Chair.
So, thank you. Typically, I usually have the non-committee members speak last. But if you want to allow Councillor Joyner
It's up to you. I'd be willing to allow that if you.
And he may want to be the last to speak on the matter. So go ahead, Councillor Augustine.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. I do think that we can vote on the separate and distinct part separately. So I think we should do that. I mean, receiving the report is one thing, but voting on it separately is another. And I think this is, we should think about this. If this occurs, it will mean that I'll call them bigs and littles. The bigs, the Niagara Falls, the St. Catharines, the Welland, those with larger populations, will be represented by 14 members on this council as they are now. And the little ones, the smaller than the smaller than 50,000 for sure, will be represented by 17. Currently it's 16. So it'll be 17 to 14 in the areas with small populations to the ones with large populations. We know, Mr. Chair, that our population across Niagara is growing. It is growing in West Lincoln. And, as I mentioned at a previous committee meeting, I had the pleasure of touring around with the mayor of West Lincoln recently to see where some of that growth is occurring. I think the growing population, not only in West Lincoln, but in Pelham, but also in Niagara Falls, which is going to grow quite large. And St. Catharines may grow up, as Councillor Timms has been known to say, and there may be some increases in population. Grow tall, thank you, grow tall, thank you. So I think that growing population provides the opportunity to rethink the composition of this council. Getting governance right is critical to our future success as a region. But I don't think we should rush this through. I think we should think about it and get it right. So for those reasons, Mr. Chair, I'm not going to be supporting, and with full apologies to the mayor, I'm not going to be supporting the second part here about directing. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Volpatti.
No, I'm fine, thank you. I'll be voting against it.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Quirk.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to be supporting this. I know as a regional councillor, a sole regional councillor for a small municipality, having the ability to work and think at a regional level sometimes puts me in conflict what may be being directed by my town council from time to time, because you have to look at a bigger picture. I think a single sole mayor sitting on this council is already at a disadvantage because they're wearing two hats, and I don't think that that provides good governance. I'm disappointed when I hear colleagues around the table saying the best way to reduce government is to reduce the number of politicians. It's somewhat self-serving, but I think when we reduce the number of politicians and we we increase the number of electors that each of us is responsible, we make further distance from the people to the level of government that's closest to them. I actually think that we do ourselves a disservice by saying that it's better to reduce the number of councillors because it's easier for those of us around this table to get things done if we don't have to listen to as many voices. So for that reason, I am supporting the motion. I also would suggest that we, as has already been indicated by yourself, Chair, we have passed the direction. Any attempts to undermine that direction would be reconsideration. So I'm somewhat concerned or shocked that everyone's willing to vote for it at one point, but we'll be able to defer it and we'll be able to delay it at a later date by just not letting the clerk proceed with the direction that needs to be taken. So I find that kind of disingenuous. As far as representation by population, we're never going to get an exact balance of what should be there and what shouldn't be there in terms of population unless we go to all councillors elected at large completely across the region, or we eliminate the municipal boundaries as a tool for deciding which municipalities are representing which councillors. So I think this is it's not ideal, but it's as close as we're going to get. And with respect to the number of regional councillors, not mayors, it's actually pretty good in terms of the percentage of people that cover. I do see that Councillor Annunziata and myself have the largest load of anyone here to represent our electors as regional councillors. Thank you.
Councillor Height.
Yes, through the staff. Did I hear one of our staff say that we've already approved this at the region? I thought we approved the fact that the town of Lincoln could address it with the government, that we haven't approved this yet.
That's right.
And I just need clarification, please.
Through you,
Go ahead.
Mr. Chair, that is absolutely correct. The motion that was passed by Council on July 20th, 2018 requested the Minister of Municipal Affairs to enact a regulation in accordance with Section 218 of the Act to provide it with the authority to begin the process to change the size of Regional Council by the addition of one member from the Township of West Lincoln.
Thank you. So that's critical. We haven't approved anything yet. So that's number one. Number two, I believe that governance change is needed in Niagara. No question about it. I've been sitting here saying one Niagara would make Niagara great. And I really, truly believe it. I know some communities don't believe it, but that's fine. I believe we should go that route, and that governance debate, whether it become 2 communities, 3 communities, or one Niagara, would be better for all of us. Number 2, eliminating municipal boundaries is critical. This doesn't do this. This just adds another rep at the region. So as Councillor Quirk spoke about that issue, that's a great idea. We could elect people by wards throughout Niagara and possibly represent the Niagarans better than they are today with the boundaries of cities. And I know some of us feel with the mayor issue that we have councillors and maybe not mayors, and maybe that could be a way to distinguish a better Niagara. I'm not 100% sure of any of them, but I believe governance should be debated and reviewed. Adding another councillor for West Lincoln, I don't believe is a solution. I think it just adds another person up here. And if you look at the population growth, I can recall the mayor speaking to us saying his population's going to double in the next, I think, 20 or 25 years, and he needs help. Well, I know the city of Niagara Falls, and by the population numbers that I was reviewing, their population from when I reviewed it a few years ago to what I see on this graph, gone up 5,000 people. There's a lot of growth going on in Niagara Falls. Not as much in St. Catharines. Grimsby's showing growth. Fort Erie is showing a little bit of growth. Lincoln is showing growth. And obviously West Lincoln's showing growth. But a total review of how we govern Niagara, I think, is critical. Adding another rep, I'm sorry, I can't support it. The motion to receive is great. I will not go further and have public meetings because I think we have to determine here whether we're in full agreement. And again, what do we do? Go to the public first? Do we and vote on it, then vote on it here? I think if this council doesn't have the appetite today to add a 31st person up at the region, really 32nd person, because we'll have a chair as well, maybe we shouldn't go any further. So I'm willing to accept the receive, but I'll vote against the direction to go to a public meeting because I'm totally opposed to just adding a person willy-nilly because the next term of office, let's add another person in Niagara Falls and St. Catharines. And I can recall when I sat on city council at St. Catharines and not at the region, at the city, we were arguing the fact that governance was needed to be changed and rep by pop should be a better way to govern Niagara. And as Mayor Augustine even brought up, it's the small against the large. No, we should be speaking globally as Niagara. We are one, and speak as one voice like we talk. Well, let's all work together. I can't agree to adding one more person here just for the sake of adding another person to represent Niagara. Let's revamp how we govern Niagara with a better list of representation by either wards, removing municipal boundaries, communities, something, but adding one doesn't solve any problems. It maybe creates another one.
Point of order, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead, Chair.
I think something is out of order here. There is a calendar of events on page 7 that gives us first, second, and third reading of the discussion of this question. So discussing it at this point is probably not in order.
Well, let's, yeah.
So
Deputy
on
Clerk?
November the 8th, I believe it is, or is it the 16th, Regional Council will be discussing whether we choose to move forward or not, and discussing it now is essentially preempting that discussion.
Go ahead, Deputy Clerk.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to offer some clarification, the recommendation is directing the clerk to proceed to schedule the public meeting and to give public notice for when the bylaw comes back to council. And so the matter of council determining whether or not they want staff to proceed to do that is in order. If the resolution is passed, then staff will proceed on that basis. And then when you wouldn't ordinarily have a bylaw coming forward at the public, or pardon me, at the public, or the, sorry, I'm getting myself confused here. So on November the 16th, so you wouldn't ordinarily have a bylaw coming forward at that point. It would be at the public meeting, but it was deemed appropriate to do so in this case, so to show council's intent, if you will. So the bylaw would then be given first and second reading next week at the regular council meeting, and then we would go forward and give public notice, because the recommendations from this committee meeting come forward at the next council meeting. So it's kind of a double or two-step process to approve the minutes of the committee meeting of the Corporate Services Committee meeting, and then passing a bylaw to give first and second reading to change the composition. The area clerks have been given advance notice at the council that this may be coming forward to them so that they can try and schedule it in their December meeting schedule as well.
I certainly appreciate what the clerk has just said. First and second reading will be on November 16th, which is next week. However, we are limiting the public's ability to weigh in on this, preempting their response. We have third and final reading on December 7th. So by deciding not to move forward with it today means that the public meetings won't take place and the public won't have a chance to weigh in. We are already preempting what they might say in advance of our December 7th meeting.
This is just to help us move this through. The intent is to help us move this through. Yeah, that's all we're asking for.
Okay, sorry, Chair, we're trying to get some clarification here. He's got a point of order, and I just want to be very clear. Go ahead, Mr. Carter.
Yes, Mr. Chair, through to members of the committee, this is just strictly for information to advise staff to move forward with the first and second reading of the bylaw next week to proceed on with the dialogue and conversation with regards to this topic. This is strictly what this is for today. Nothing more, nothing less. So.
Thank you for that clarification. Supporting my point of order is that deciding this today at this meeting is out of order of what the schedule of events is.
The council's not deciding. Sorry, Mr. Chair, the council's not being asked to decide the matter. They're being asked to direct staff to proceed to schedule, to keep the process going.
I understand that. I believe that council feels, or this committee feels like they are making the decision today, and I need everybody to be clear that that is not the case according to the schedule we have before us.
Yeah, so thank you, Chair Cousin, for raising this item. In other words, if the committee says no to providing the notice, then the process comes to a complete stop, thereby not allowing the, okay. So it could be deferred, or if it's, with that, you know.
It's a point of order, I think.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Just the point of order to the chair's comment. Is it in order, here's the question, I think, is it in order for this committee to stop the process, I think is what's being asked. The chair is saying it's not, others are saying I said it was. So the question is it in order, or do staff have to do it anyways, and it was just information? I think that's what the chair is asking.
Yeah, that's right. Go ahead.
Mr. Chair, through to members of the committee, yes, the process identified in the report is staff's recommendation to proceed accordingly. So it would be fair to move this on to to council next week to consider the first and second reading of the bylaw. That is staff's recommendation. Based on the, yes.
But is this, my question, is this committee, and the chair's question, is this committee allowed, is it in order for us to stop the process?
Yeah, I understand, and maybe we're not getting a clear enough answer. The request, the motion that was passed by council is on page 6. That's clear. The Minister of Municipal Affairs has in fact enacted the regulation to allow the opportunity to add the additional seat for West Lincoln. And so should that in fact go directly to council, CAO, thank you.
Through Chair, thank you, Councillor Augustine, for the question. I just confirmed with staff. Yes, we require direction to proceed to a public meeting. That's this committee's decision.
Okay, thank you. So we heard the various points of order. Councillor Nunziata.
Point of order, Mr. Chair. May I be able to speak because I'm not a part of this?
I'm respectfully going to ask you to speak last as a non-committee member, and as a non-committee member, I don't think you have the right to raise a point of order. I understand this is an important issue, but I'm going to keep following the speakers list, and I will ensure you have an opportunity to speak.
Okay, so I take issue with the CAO's last comments. That's why I raised on a point of order.
Okay. Councillor Nunziata.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have no problem supporting our colleague. He comes here in good faith, being the voice of his municipality. It's a lot of work. I know it's a lot of work between myself and the mayor, representing the issues of Fort Erie at the regional level. He came here in good faith and with a strategy in place, and I respect the strategy that our colleague has put in place. He moved mountains to actually get the letter from the province on the timeline, the very ambitious timeline that he set. So, you know, I find it rich, and that the conversation has to do about Niagara Falls or St. Catharines and their representation. Part of our job as elected leaders is to represent the interests of our community. Member Joyner has been, Councillor Joyner is doing that. And he's made a conscious effort to come here and say, listen, the workload is a lot. We're a growing community, and more effective representation is in order. So I have no problem supporting our colleague, and to derail the process at this point, I think it would be a sad commentary. He had direction, he had a strategy, and he's trying to fulfill that strategy. So I respect that.
Great, thank you, Councillor. Councillor Timms.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess the primary issue is that council should respect the process, just like council did respect the process when St. Catharines asked for consideration of the double direct issue, and we got the minister's approval, and this council respected the city's request. So I think that's where we should go on this one. And so I'll be supporting the motion. Just a couple other points that were mentioned about St. Catharines is committed to growing tall. St. Catharines is also committed to respecting the Greenbelt. So we're not going to grow wide for considerable time, as I understand the will of the city.
Councillor,
this committee is to...
Councillor Timms.
Yes, sir.
I think you're steering well away from the resolutions on the floor.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, but I'm going to the question of, you know, St. Catharines represents 133,000 people with 6 councillors. I think that was mentioned with regard to Niagara Falls representation in terms of the number of seats. So we're at this point resting, I think 6 seats, 22,000 per seat. And I expect that we will grow somewhat in the near future, but I expect that West Lincoln is asking for this extra seat based on the notion that they will grow substantially faster because they sit outside the Greenbelt. St. Catharines is inside the Greenbelt. They're outside, most of it outside the jurisdiction of the Escarpment Commission, and they sit on Regional Road number 20, and on the very edge of one of the fastest growing areas of our neighbor in Hamilton. So I think what the mayor had made that point in the past, when this council approved the first step in asking the minister to approve an additional seat for West Lincoln. So we've done all that. And just as we respected the process for the city of St. Catharines on the double duty, double direct motion, we should respect the process that we've initiated for West Lincoln for the extra seat. So this motion here directs us to continue the process in respect for what we've already done, and in respect for the minister's approval, and in respect for the town of West Lincoln's request. So I'd urge council that we continue. I know St. Catharines will be very concerned about the representation by population, as we always have been. But in this case, we've set the direction, council's already agreed. Let's respect the process and continue the process. Thank you.
Councillor Easton.
Mr. Chairman, I agree. We should be respecting the process. One thing that I think is pretty clear is that the Municipal Act doesn't say to Mayor Joyner, because you have a lower population than the city of St. Catharines, you don't need to worry about sections A to M. They don't tell you that. We are responsible for the same standard of concern and care as any other sized municipality. So I think in this case, we have to respect the workload the basic workload that goes into a community representing itself effectively. It is also a reality that in this past year, in the last 8 months in particular, the barrage of provincial policy has been more like a tsunami. And yet, every municipality is expected to represent those policies in the most effective way. And a fast-growing community like West Lincoln should be given regard for their ability to represent. So for that reason, I support these motions going forward. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Gale.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to be consistent with what I said before, that I feel before we add more members on here, we should analyze what we have here. I felt when I got elected, and I said that at the time, we're too big at the time. Since then, I feel that we should analyze how many people we have. I have nothing against West Lincoln, but this is too big of a body to go ahead just with the discussions we've had today. I also feel that after coming in, Councilor Height mentioned One Niagara and things like this. And I'm not going to go on forever, Chair, but I've changed my feeling on this. I feel there's too many services here at the region. I think there should be some services given back to the mayors. And that's a complete about-face with what I was before, but I think the checks and balances are more with the municipalities. So I'll be voting against this, and it's nothing against West Lincoln. I think we should analyze this whole makeup. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Joyner, thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I understand that my what I say stands between us and lunch, so I'll be very brief. Yes, I would ask every member of council here to respect the process. I have done what the people of West Lincoln have voted me in to do, and that's to set out to get another regional council here in West Lincoln. If you choose as a regional councilor to analyze the whole composition of Niagara, I ask you to bring that forward, as I have brought forward an additional person. So whether you believe in One Niagara, whether you believe in smaller government, doesn't matter what you believe in, and bring it forward. Much the same as St. Catharines wanted us to believe that double duty direct was the way to go, we bought into it in West Lincoln. I bought into it. It's what the municipality of St. Catharines wanted. They wanted double duty direct. Listen to me, folks. This is what West Lincoln wants. So please don't derail the process. I have so much heavy lifting, and my council has so much heavy lifting to do to actually get to that December 7th point. We're not even sure that that's going to happen. But if you cut us off at the legs right now, we'll never know. And as one of my fellow councilors said, this was a large mountain to climb in order to actually get the minister to actually agree to go on with this process. So I ask you to not derail the process, to respect the process, and let's go through this motion. I want to also say in question to, and I thank Councillor Maves for the question about the numbers here. These numbers are way off. They are way off, even in the last couple of years, of the amount of population. And I obviously didn't do a very good job of waltzing Councillor Augustine around either to show him the potential. Although he's commented that I did that, I obviously didn't get through to him where all the different subdivisions and how many numbers and how many roofs are going to be built in West Lincoln. I got to do a better job. I hope I got through to Councillor Edgar that too as well. I tried to set out to bring all the people who are on the Niagara Steering Committee. Is that what it's called, Niagara Steering Committee? Smarter Niagara Steering Committee, so I can get them to understand that we're not about just chewing up agricultural land. We're all about policy. We're all about infill and intensification, and it's coming. And Councillor Easton talked about that tsunami. Absolutely, 100%. So regional councillors, don't overthink this, okay? This is a process, and you can talk about your One Niagara all day long, and I'll guarantee you that my ears will be listening to what you have to say about that. But I'll tell you this much, if that's what you believe, then bring it forward. Do not stop West Lincoln. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Well articulated, Councillor Joyner. Councillor Augustine, I know you spoke to it already.
Yeah, second time.
Go ahead.
Well, I want to change my mind because they said it's about the process. So this is initiating the process. I'm not going to change my mind that I'm not supportive of it, but the time for debating that, I think, was made by a few around the horseshoe. The time for debating that wasn't this morning. It's at council at the public meeting. So I'm going to support this moving forward in the process. I'm going to be opposed to it when it comes to us, but I think we should move the process forward. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much. No other speakers. I'll call the question. All in favor? Okay, two things. Thank you. Someone made a request to separate this. So the receive for information, I'm going to call the question. All in favor of receiving for information? Opposed, if any, that's carried. Thank you. Number 2, there's a request for a recorded vote. I'll look to the clerk to open the vote when ready. Okay, that's carried. Thank you. We have another item, CSD 74, 2017. That's with respect to the 2018 meeting schedule. Councillor Quirk.
Thank you, Chair. I'm moving the report and asking that we adopt option 2, and I'm happy to speak to that.
Option 2, is there a seconder for that?
Sorry, option 2 was the monthly schedule. I'm sorry, my apologies, option 3. Let me make sure I've got that right now.
Okay, one moment. Let's be clear about which option is being, okay, go ahead.
Okay.
Through you, Mr. Chair, my sincerest apologies, but the recommendation from staff was actually option 3. It was a bit of a typo on in the report. Option 3 is the monthly meetings. So if council would be willing to look at option 3, that's what staff is recommending.
So I was moving option 2 because I was trying to support staff, but staff can't type, so I don't know how we're going to. So if I may speak to it, we had a seconder for option 3?
So just if I can be clear about what each of the 3 options are, because both option 2 and 3 are monthly meetings.
Yes.
So if you can just give a quick flyover of the options.
Sure. So if I may, the options as suggested are monthly meetings. However, we maintain the current, is similar to the current process where we meet Tuesdays, the committees will meet on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, and then council meetings will be on Thursdays. Option 3 aligns all the council meetings on Thursdays, mornings and afternoons, committee meetings, and then have council again on Thursday night. So it allows staff a little more time to actually prepare better for council and committee meetings.
So 1 second, the CEO's asked to speak. Go ahead.
Thank you, Chair, and to committee. What we've been finding with reports, and sometimes they get delayed, is that a lot of the reports get vetted through legal, finance, well, those are the 2 primary ones. And so what happens is that when you have 4 meetings back to back in 2 days, we're putting a lot of, we start getting a backlog when we're looking for legal and finance to provide commentary. By separating it into 2 weeks, it'll give a little bit more breathing room for those 2 key departments. Thanks.
Councilor Quirk.
So I speak to both of the options that are in front of us at a monthly meeting. I do like the alignment of, I've said since I've been elected here, and this is my only first term, the 3-week schedule puts me at a disalignment with my local council's meetings that are on a monthly basis. So sometimes I go to council and I have nothing to report because we haven't hit a meeting yet, or vice versa. So I like the idea of monthly meetings. I also like the idea of either with option 2 or option 3, knowing it's the 2nd Tuesday of every month I got to be here, 2nd Wednesday of every month. I like option 3. I didn't think that was a recommendation, but I also like option 3 better because I know that Thursdays are booked. I know that Thursdays are my busy days, and I like that. I actually like that more than the option 2. I do like the idea of having time between various committee meetings, because all of a sudden on a committee week, I'm reading 4 standing committees worth of reports on a Sunday, trying to get all prepped for this week, and it becomes hectic. So I was happy to recommend number 2 as a staff recommendation. I'm even happier to recommend option 3 because I do like that consistency with knowing don't book anything for me on Thursdays. I'm here at council.
Okay, thank you. So was there a seconder for option 3? Councillor Edgar, thanks very much. Councillor Timms, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was going to ask the question of whose idea was this. I think I heard the answer that the idea came from our CAO in terms of making this easier and better for staff. Is that fair? I don't think this initiative came from council, but I just want to be clear on that question first.
Thank you, Chair. To Councillor Timms, the continued discussions we have at corporate leadership team is timeliness of reports and the delivery of the reports. It was consensus amongst the corporate leadership team to recommend a monthly schedule.
Okay, thank you. That's good to hear that it was, I guess, from staff point of view. My concern is more from the elected representatives' point of view. I don't think this will solve our problem of short-term reports landing on our desk or recommendations landing on our desk the day before. I think it will delay council's ability to achieve business in a timely manner. We're going to achieve business once a month now. And under that circumstance, there's going to be a whole pile of stuff land on our desk in short term, like immediate need, because if we don't deal with it today, it'll be a month before we can deal with it. I remember going back to the days when we had council every 2 weeks. We knew exactly when it was going to happen, so that was the schedule issue. Then we moved to 3 weeks so that we would have a week to receive reports, consider them, come to committee, deal with them, and then another week to deal with or to consider committees' discussions and then deal with it at council. So that caused another set of issues, and I think produced more last-minute walk-on reports. So I'm happy with status quo. I don't think there's any appetite to go back every 2 weeks procedure. But the argument at the time was, you got the reports, you had them for a week, you dealt with them at committee, then you had another week to deal with committee, and you dealt with them at council. And that led to a 3-week cycle. Very often it leads to a 6-week cycle. And when you get to the subcommittees, it's a 6-week cycle to deal with anything from a subcommittee. Now it's going to be 8-week cycles, and I think this is maybe helpful to staff, but I don't think it's helpful to councilors. And so I oppose any change to what we have. I'd be more interested in seeing no more last-minute walk-on reports. And this, I think, will just exacerbate that problem. So I'm opposed to any change in what we're doing right now. Thank you.
Councillor Augustine?
Thanks very much, Mr. Chair. I'll be quick. I agree with Councillor Quirk on the timing of it, and I think it's good to do it. I want to clarify that these are, if the Thursday meetings are during the day meetings as opposed to at night meetings, for the committee meetings, that is, right? Okay, good. Councillor Joyner was asking that. But I do agree partially with Councillor Timms that the reports, I think this will actually allow staff to align reports better as opposed to, maybe I shouldn't say scramble, but try to meet the needs. You can plan it much better, I think. Clerk's office, CAO's office, approvals, etc. And I would recommend that we really look at those timelines. And I've said this at the procedural bylaw committee. In terms of the advanced timelines, it's kind of mixed up with council, and now it's going to be even more mixed up because you're going to have public health, and people will know public health will be whatever, and you make a anyways, that's important, the timing of things. And then the final question I have, and staff can look into this, is I think we may need to change our procedure bylaw because I think it's codified in the procedure bylaw. So, Ms. Norio is saying we don't, so, well, that's good news. So thanks, they already checked that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Gale.
Chair, I'm annoyed with this, that this comes out now, because we passed our police service board schedule 2 weeks ago. And I had asked about the schedule based on trips I wanted to take in that next year about a month ago. Now this is coming out, and as you know, 2 Thursdays every month is police service board. We can adapt to anything. But this is annoying that this is coming out now for us to have to decide this now. If anybody had thought about proposing this, I wish it would have come to us for discussion in September or October. If you said this starts a year from now, then I'd agree to it, but we'll adapt to whatever you do. But you know, all the work that Deb does on the police board with our schedule that we've adapted, and now this comes out here, this is ridiculous. Thanks.
Councillor Easton.
Mr. Chairman, there's an element to changing the schedule, which I think is important and one that this council needs to address, and that is the whole business of how we operate. This council does not operate from a policy position, which I think is a real limitation in terms of our effectiveness from a governance perspective. I don't know, and I guess this is a question to the CAO, whether by rearranging the schedule in this way, is the intention to tighten down our decision-making process. I'd like to hear whether that was part of his analysis. I certainly hope that the number of addendums will decrease as a result of this, as a result of a decision to move in this direction. By decreasing the addendums, I hope that it will also decrease the persistent rearrangement of the agenda, which makes meetings much more complicated and actually creates chaos at the table, which I think is unnecessary. So from my perspective, it's about being more disciplined in terms of our governance perspective, and I'd like to know what the CAO had in mind, if anything. Thank you.
CAO.
Through Chair to Councillor Easton, precisely the discussion we had at CLT, we talked about agendas that are published with reports saying to be distributed, and also the number of addendums reports with a number of attached reports. We heard from the clerks that of the timeliness of the reports, and it's our understanding that there's, as I said before, there is particular departments such as finance who need to comment on a lot of the reports. So our conclusion is that one of the mitigation measures is to go to a monthly format, because we anticipate a decrease in the number of times we're walking on the floor or issuing addendum items. Not to say we're going to eliminate it entirely, but it'll reduce the number. That's what our goal is and our anticipation. The other factor we also considered is there are at times, and council, as their will, and it's appropriate, refers it back to the next committee report. And that's tough for us to meet that time frame, because when council refers back a report, we got a 3-week turnaround to try and get that down. And sometimes there's a lot more work involved in order to meet council's direction. So having said that, that's the goal, to make it more robust, to follow within our policy regime. But to your comment, are we tightening council's decision-making? I don't know. I don't want to provide commentary to that. I would never want to influence council's decisions. So whether we're tightening it or not, that's subjective. I'm not sure if we're doing that or not.
All right, Mr. Chairman, I wouldn't expect, and if I was inappropriate, and I believe that I was, I wouldn't expect you to comment on that. However, Mr. Chairman, to you, I would say that schooling in policy governance is something that we require. And that is not just me speaking off the top of my head. This is the direction that all boards, and we are a board, this is the direction that all boards are going. And I've seen some pretty significant changes in the public sector in this regard. And I think that we should discipline ourselves to move in that direction, because we spend far too much time talking about operational matters. And for, as a mayor, I want to hold the CAO at the region accountable for operations. I cannot hold my colleagues accountable for their opinions or for the way they do business, but I can hold the CAO accountable through you, Mr. Chairman, and that is the preferred method I would like to see in the future. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Chair Caslin.
Thank you. I'd like to propose that we refer this to a year from now, next year at this time, such that the schedule would stay the same and we would not reduce our number of meetings for 2018, but give the next council the opportunity to make the decision on a go-forward basis. So I put forward a motion to refer this until next term of council.
Seconded by Councillor Maves. There's no further comment on a referral. I guess if I may just get clarity, if there's no decision made on approving the schedule, it is status quo. Okay, that's correct. Thank you. Point of order. Go ahead, Councillor.
Well, just the next council is going to be selected next December. Is that enough time to put a schedule together for people's planning purposes?
I'm not accepting that as a point of order.
Well, I'm
Councillor.
just, it's the timing of when the report's coming back. You're saying leave it for the next council. They'll make a decision in December of January.
So to be clear,
of
it's
2018.
status quo schedule for 2018. and that any revised calendar be brought forward to the next term of council for their consideration for 2019 and beyond.
Okay, I just don't think that's appropriate, but.
Okay. Okay, all in favor of the referral motion? Opposed, if any? That is carried. Thank you. There are no consent items for information. Is there any other business? Other business, Councillor Joyner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Real quickly on the recorded vote, I didn't vote because I'm not allowed to vote, but it came up as me being a no, and I am not a no, sir.
Okay, thank you for highlighting that. That has been corrected. There's no closed session either. The next meeting is November 29th. This meeting is adjourned. Thank you.